I stood shivering in the freezing Seattle rain, watching my husband violently toss my expensive luggage down the front steps. My designer clothes scattered across the muddy lawn, ruined in an instant. But the real blow came when he hurled a plastic stick directly at my chest. It was a positive pregnancy test. Pointing his finger in my face, he screamed hysterically that he had undergone a medical procedure 3 years ago that made this impossible, declaring he would never provide for another man's child. Locking me out, completely convinced he was the victim, he emptied the house for a reason I had yet to discover. He had no idea that his cruel, calculated choices were about to trigger a chain reaction that would strip him of his company, his dignity, and his entire future. And it was all thanks to a $50 million secret from my past. My name is Sydney, and I'm 34. Before we go any further, let me know in the comments below where you're watching from. And if you've ever had your trust completely shattered by someone you loved, only to rise from the ashes stronger than ever, please hit that like button and subscribe. Growing up in the foster care system taught me how to survive, but absolutely nothing could have prepared me for the devastating betrayal I experienced on that stormy Tuesday night. The relentless Pacific Northwest rain pelted my face as I looked up at the custom oak doors of our home in Bellevue. That was a house I had furnished with my own hard-earned money, using my income as a public relations consultant to turn a cold piece of real estate into a warm, inviting haven. Now I was standing in a flooded driveway, watching Trent, the man I had loved for 5 years, dismantle everything we had built together. My 36-year-old husband stood on the covered porch. The warm exterior lighting illuminated his handsome face, which was now twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. Grasping the handle of my heavy leather suitcase, he swung it wildly. The zipper burst open the moment it impacted the concrete walkway. Silk blouses, cashmere sweaters, and tailored trousers scattered across the wet grass, immediately soaking up mud and freezing water. I tried to step forward, hands raised in a desperate gesture of appeal. "Trent, please stop. What are you doing? Let's just go inside and talk. The neighbors will hear you." He let out a sharp, mocking laugh that cut right through the sound of the downpour. "Let them hear, Sydney. Let the whole neighborhood know exactly what kind of woman you are." Reaching into the pocket of his expensive custom jacket, he pulled out a small white plastic object. He threw it at me with aggressive force, and it bounced off my waterproof coat, landing in the muddy puddle at my feet. I looked down. It was the positive pregnancy test I had left on the bathroom vanity an hour ago, originally packaged in a small gift box with a ribbon. I had planned to surprise him when he got home from work. I had planned to celebrate the family we were finally starting. Instead, he looked at me with pure, unfiltered disgust. "Don't try to pin this on me," he shouted, his voice echoing down the quiet suburban street. I stood frozen, staring at him in utter shock. My brain struggled to process the intense hostility in his words. "Trent, what are you talking about? This is our baby. We discussed this." He took a threatening step toward the edge of the porch, his hands clenched into fists. "Stop lying to my face, Sydney. I had a vasectomy 3 years ago. I never had it reversed. It is biologically impossible for that child to be mine. So tell me, which wealthy PR client have you been sleeping with?" The air left my lungs as if I had been struck. The accusation was so absurd, so completely detached from reality, that for a split second I thought he was having a psychological breakdown. Wiping the freezing rain from my eyes, I desperately tried to reason with him. "Trent, you know exactly how I got pregnant. We did a cycle of IVF 2 years ago. We froze 3 perfectly healthy embryos. I told you last month that I was scheduling the transfer. I asked you to come to the clinic with me. I remembered that day perfectly. I had stood in the kitchen, holding the clinic brochure, practically begging him to join me, but he had barely looked up from his laptop, claiming an urgent corporate audit required his full attention, and telling me to handle the medical appointments myself. He scoffed, shaking his head in exaggerated disbelief. "Do you really think I'm that stupid? I called the clinic, Sydney. They told me you never showed up for any transfer. You fabricated this elaborate lie to cover up your affair, and I'm not standing here letting you make a fool out of me." My heart hammered against my ribs. Nothing he was saying made any sense. I had been to the clinic. I had the medical records, the receipts, and the discharge papers. I reached into my coat pocket for my phone, intending to pull up the secure patient portal and prove it to him on the spot. "Look at my medical portal, Trent. The transfer was done on the 14th. Dr. Iris performed it herself. Just look at the screen." I stepped onto the bottom stair, holding up the glowing device. But before I could show him, he violently slapped it out of my hand. The phone flew through the air, crashing hard against the concrete steps, the screen shattering into a useless web of cracks.
"I don't need to look at your fabricated evidence," he growled, his eyes narrowing with a frighteningly cold calculation. "I know the truth. You're a liar and a cheat. I'm filing for divorce first thing tomorrow morning."
Turning around, he grabbed the final cardboard box of my belongings from the entryway and dumped it unceremoniously onto the porch. Books, high-end cosmetics, and my favorite coffee mug shattered against the hard ground, ceramic shards spraying out into the rain. "This isn't my house," Trent shouted, pointing directly at my face. "My name is on the deed, and you have no rights here. Leave your keys on the mat. If you try to come back inside, I'll have you removed for trespassing." I stood there, paralyzed by the sheer violence of his sudden rejection. This was the man who had promised to protect me, the man whose lifestyle I had funded during his brutal corporate climb, the man whose empty house I had turned into a beautiful home. Now he was looking at me as if I were an adversary to be eliminated. My hand shook uncontrollably, not just from the biting cold of the Seattle storm, but from the realization of the massive, cruel mistake he was making. I knew the truth. I knew the child growing inside me was absolutely his. I knew I hadn't been unfaithful for a single second of our marriage. As a PR consultant, I made a living analyzing human behavior, deconstructing lies, and managing corporate crises. I knew exactly what a manufactured narrative looked like. Looking into Trent's eyes, a sickening realization washed over me. He wasn't a heartbroken husband discovering a betrayal. He was a man executing a carefully planned exit strategy. The rage was an act. The medical claim was a calculated weapon. He stepped back into the warm, dry foyer, grasping the heavy brass handle of the front door. "Have a nice life, Sydney. Go find someone else to pay for your mistakes." The heavy oak door slammed shut with a sickening thud. The deadbolt clicked into place, echoing loudly in the damp night air. I was left entirely in the dark, soaked to the skin, staring at the ruins of my marriage, scattered across the muddy lawn. I had no idea that Trent was actively forcing me out for a very specific, sinister purpose. But as I stood in the downpour, wrapping my arms around my stomach to protect the tiny life inside, a cold, fierce resolve began to take root in my chest. He had just made the biggest miscalculation of his life. The heavy deadbolt clicked, echoing just seconds after Trent had locked me out. The oak door swung open once more, casting a long, mocking shadow across the flooded walkway. For a brief moment, I thought Trent had come to his senses. I stepped forward, rain dripping from my eyelashes, ready to explain the clinic's protocols, the embryo transfer, and the scientific facts he was choosing to ignore. But Trent wasn't alone. Stepping onto the covered porch, holding a steaming cup of tea, as if she were watching a theatrical performance, was Patricia, his 62-year-old mother. Right behind her was Courtney, his 32-year-old sister, a smug, self-satisfied smile plastered across her face, perfectly mirroring her brother's demeanor. They had been inside the entire time. They had listened to him throw my belongings into the mud and accuse me of infidelity, and they had done absolutely nothing to stop it. "Patricia!" I gasped, my voice trembling from the biting wind. "Tell him he's making a mistake. You know we froze embryos 2 years ago. You were at the hospital with us during the retrieval. You know this child is his." Patricia took a slow, deliberate sip from her cup. Her perfectly coiffed silver hair remained untouched by the storm, raging just a few feet away. She looked down at me, her gaze sweeping over my ruined clothes and the shattered phone on the concrete steps. "Don't drag me into your disgusting lies, Sydney," Patricia said, her voice dripping with venom. "Trent told us you cancelled the transfer. He told us you've been acting strangely lately, staying out late under the guise of handling high-end male clients. We all know what happens in the PR industry. You're a career-obsessed woman who finally realized her biological clock was ticking, and you panicked.
I stared at her, the sting of betrayal multiplying with every syllable she uttered. They were actively rewriting history.
Courtney stepped forward, leaning against the doorframe and crossing her arms over her expensive cashmere sweater. "Just give it up, Sydney," Courtney sneered. "My brother is far too smart to fall into your trap. He had that procedure done precisely to ensure you couldn't use a pregnancy to tie him down when your PR firm inevitably fails. You thought you could sleep around, get pregnant, and use our family's wealth to secure your future. It's pathetic." I shook my head, my brain spinning from the sheer scale of their gaslighting. "What family wealth?" I demanded, my shock finally giving way to a white-hot, burning anger. "I paid for the renovations on this entire house. I subsidized Trent's lifestyle when he was just a junior partner. I built my firm from nothing, while you, Courtney, have spent a decade living off your husband's salary." Patricia slammed her cup onto the patio table. "How dare you speak to my daughter that way?" Patricia hissed, her face contorting with rage. "I told Trent from the very beginning that marrying someone with no family background was a massive mistake. You grew up in the foster system. You have no lineage, no class, and no concept of loyalty. You were just a stray dog he brought home, and now you're biting the hand that fed you. We allowed you into our family, and you repay us by trying to pass off a lie as a legitimate heir." Trent stepped up beside his mother and sister, puffing out his chest, completely emboldened by his malicious audience. "Let me make one thing crystal clear, Sydney. I am filing for divorce first thing in the morning, and this house belongs to me. You foolishly agreed to keep your name off the deed back then because of your student loans, just to get a better mortgage rate. You have no legal standing here. You have no family to run to. You have absolutely nothing. Take your soaked clothes and get off my property. If you aren't gone in 60 seconds, I'm calling the police." Their cruelty was so perfectly synchronized, so flawlessly orchestrated, that the terrible truth finally clicked into place. This wasn't a spontaneous argument. It was an ambush. They had planned this exact moment. They had waited for a stormy night to cast me out, ensuring I would be at my most vulnerable. They wanted to break me psychologically and financially, stripping away the assets I had poured into this marriage and leaving me on the street with an unborn child. They truly believed I was a weak, isolated orphan who would simply crumble under their combined weight. They thought I would walk away quietly into the rain, filled with shame and defeat. I didn't move an inch. The freezing rain had soaked through my coat, chilling me to the bone, but the fire ignited in my chest kept me standing tall. I looked at Trent, then Patricia, and finally Courtney, memorizing the smug satisfaction on their faces. I was opening my mouth to tell them that I would drag them through every courtroom in this state, that I would subpoena every medical record and expose their malicious fraud to the world. But before I could utter a single syllable, a blinding beam of light cut through the downpour, casting harsh, sweeping shadows across the flooded lawn. The deep, unmistakable growl of a high-performance engine drowned out the sound of the storm. We all turned our heads toward the street. A sleek, midnight black luxury sedan was moving smoothly up our long driveway, its tires cutting through the deep puddles with arrogant ease. It was a vehicle that cost more than Trent's entire annual salary, a car that commanded immediate attention and respect. The vehicle came to a halt directly behind my ruined luggage. The headlights illuminated the rain-slicked driveway, freezing Trent, Patricia, and Courtney instantly in their tracks. The smug smiles melted off their faces, replaced immediately by utter confusion. The heavy engine idled quietly, vibrating with raw power as the passenger side door slowly swung open. But before whoever was inside could step out into the raging storm, the front door of the house was pushed wider. Jamal rushed out onto the porch. Jamal, 34, was a striking African-American man who typically carried himself with a quiet, grounded dignity. Tonight, however, his face was pale with absolute horror. He had clearly been upstairs, entirely oblivious to the full extent of the ambush, until the shouting had echoed through the walls of the house. In his hands, he tightly clutched my heavy, wool winter coat. His eyes darted frantically from the scattered debris of my life to me, standing frozen and shivering in the icy mud. "Sydney, you're going to freeze," Jamal said, his voice laced with empathy and deep disbelief. He stepped decisively down the concrete stairs, extending the warm coat toward me. "Please, take this jacket. You absolutely cannot be out in this weather." Before his foot could even touch the second step, Courtney lunged forward with frightening speed. She dug her manicured nails into Jamal's forearm, violently yanking him backward. "What do you think you're doing?" she screamed, her face contorting with an ugly, territorial rage. "Don't give that cheating liar anything from this house. She is trespassing on our property." Jamal stumbled back, looking at his wife, his jaw clenched tightly. "Courtney, look at her," he pleaded, dropping his voice to a desperate, urgent whisper. "She's pregnant. She's freezing out in the rain. This is insane. You can't just cast her out into a storm like this." Trent spun around, thrusting a finger directly into Jamal's chest. "You'd better remember exactly who signs your paychecks, Jamal," Trent threatened, his voice dropping to a lethal, calculated volume. "You are the chief accountant at my firm. You live in a house that I helped finance for my sister. If you hand that jacket to that woman, you can clear out your desk first thing Monday morning and join her on the street. Do not test me tonight." I watched the light of resistance vanish from Jamal's eyes in an instant. The threat was a direct, devastating blow to his livelihood and his marriage. He was caught in their toxic web, entirely dependent on the salary from Trent's firm to survive and provide for his own family. Looking down at the wool coat in his hands, his knuckles turning white from the grip, he slowly lowered his head in profound shame. He stepped back into the shadows of the porch, physically unable to meet my gaze any longer. I didn't blame him at all. I knew exactly how ruthlessly Trent and Patricia punished anyone who dared defy their twisted version of family loyalty. With Jamal effectively silenced, the family turned their urgent attention back to the sleek Mercedes idling in our driveway. A driver dressed in a crisp black suit stepped around the hood, opening a massive umbrella and holding it carefully over the passenger door. A pair of red stiletto heels stepped onto the wet asphalt, followed immediately by the full figure of Bianca. She was 28 years old and radiated an obvious, aggressive display of wealth. She wore a pristine white designer trench coat that looked utterly ridiculous in the middle of a Seattle downpour. Clutching a limited edition handbag tightly to her side, she shook out her perfectly styled salon hair. She looked up at the house, completely ignoring the ruined remnants of my life scattered across the lawn. This was the woman Trent had been hiding. This was the self-proclaimed heiress Patricia and Courtney were so desperate to replace me with. Trent transformed instantly. The terrifying red-faced monster who had just thrown my luggage into the mud vanished entirely. In his place stood a sickeningly eager, sycophantic suitor. He bounded down the wet concrete steps, brushing past my shivering body as if I didn't even exist. "Bianca, darling," Trent murmured softly, reaching her side and wrapping his arms tightly around her waist. Pulling her close, he kissed her passionately, right there in the rain, pressing his lips to hers in a deliberate, highly choreographed display of affection. It was a kiss meant entirely for my benefit, a final cruel twist of the knife to ensure I understood exactly how easily I was being replaced by someone younger and supposedly wealthier. When they pulled apart, Bianca let out a high-pitched, artificial laugh, finally letting her gaze drift over to me. She scanned my soaked clothes, my ruined hair, and the shards of my favorite coffee mug resting in the mud. There wasn't a hint of surprise or remorse in her eyes. She looked at me the way someone looks at a piece of litter that had blown onto her pristine driveway.
"Oh my goodness, Trent," Bianca cooed, leaning dramatically into his side. "Is this the unhinged ex you were telling me about? The one who refuses to leave gracefully?"
Trent kissed her temple, shooting a look of absolute disdain in my direction. "Ignore her, babe. She was just leaving. Let's get you inside. It's freezing out here, and you need to protect our little miracle." Our little miracle! The words hit my chest like a physical blow. The hypocrisy was so staggering it made it hard to breathe. Trent was parading his pregnant companion into the house, proudly claiming her unborn child as his own, while simultaneously rejecting his own biological infant carried in my womb. Patricia and Courtney parted like the Red Sea, their faces breaking into manufactured ecstatic smiles as Trent escorted Bianca up the steps.
"Oh, Bianca, we are so thrilled you're finally here," Patricia gushed, stepping forward to take the younger woman's expensive coat. "Let's get you inside by the fireplace where it's warm."
The sheer cruelty of watching another woman walk into the home I had funded and decorated with my own money kept me rooted to the spot. Trent paused at the threshold, one hand still gripped tightly around Bianca's waist. He looked back at me over his shoulder, his eyes gleaming with a malicious, undeniable sense of victory. "Goodbye, Sydney. I suggest you get moving." The heavy oak door slammed shut for the final time. The deadbolt engaged with a loud, metallic click. The exterior porch lights snapped off, plunging the yard into immediate darkness. I was left entirely alone in the freezing rain, standing amidst the waterlogged ruins of my past. Shivering uncontrollably as the storm continued to rage, I forced my frozen limbs to move, dropping to my knees in the cold mud to salvage what little I could. My fingers were completely numb as I stuffed a few soaked sweaters and my ruined laptop into the only suitcase with a working zipper. Dragging the heavy waterlogged bags down the flooded street, I made my way to where my 10-year-old sedan was parked. Trent had once insisted I keep the older car to save money, claiming his image as an executive strictly required luxury vehicles leased in his name alone. Now that battered sedan was the only shelter I had left. Throwing the wet bags into the trunk, I climbed into the driver's seat and locked the doors with trembling hands. The heater roared to life, blowing lukewarm air against my soaked clothes. I drove aimlessly away from the affluent Bellevue neighborhood, watching the massive estates fade into the dark, relentless storm. I eventually pulled into the parking lot of a cheap, rundown motel on the edge of the city, its neon sign flickering through the downpour. Checking my banking app on the shattered screen of my phone, I saw that Trent had already drained our joint checking account, leaving the balance at zero. My personal account had exactly $42 to my name. I turned off the engine and curled into a tight ball in the back seat, pulling a damp wool coat over my shivering shoulders. The rain hammered violently against the thin metal roof of the car. Placing a trembling hand flat against my stomach, I felt the slight, barely perceptible curve beneath my ruined clothes. The despair that threatened to drag me under suddenly shifted into a fierce, blinding resolve. Closing my eyes tightly, I made a silent, unbreakable vow to the tiny life growing inside me. I promised my unborn child that we would survive this. I swore that I would never allow anyone to trample over us again. I would claw my way back from absolute nothingness if I had to. Exhaustion finally took over my racing thoughts, and I drifted into a restless, feverish sleep right there in the parking lot. I was jolted awake by the sharp, piercing ring of my phone, echoing through the freezing cabin of the car. I sat up straight, my heart hammering against my ribs. The digital clock on the dashboard read exactly 6 a.m. The rain had settled into a steady, depressing drizzle. Scrambling in the footwell, I grabbed my shattered phone. An unfamiliar high-end corporate number was flashing on the screen. Expecting it to be Trent's attorney threatening me with early eviction proceedings, I swiped to answer, ready for a fight. "Hello," I rasped, my voice raw and defensive.
"Is this Sydney Thorne?" the caller asked. His voice was deep, authoritative, and carried the unmistakable cadence of expensive legal counsel.
"Nobody has called me by that last name in over a decade," I replied, my brow furrowing in confusion. "Thorne was my maiden name from when I was 18, a lifetime ago. My legal name is Sydney Preston. Who is this?" "I'm Mr. Caldwell," he stated calmly. "I'm the senior estate attorney representing Gabriel Thorne. It took me most of the night to track you down, Sydney. I'm calling to inform you that Gabriel passed away yesterday afternoon from sudden heart failure." The S seemed to vanish from the damp car. Gabriel. The name pulled me violently back to a past I had completely buried. I had met Gabriel when I was an 18-year-old girl, desperate to avoid homelessness after aging out of the foster care system. He was a brilliant, reclusive tech developer in his 20s, just beginning to build his empire out of a cramped garage. We had married hastily in a quiet courthouse ceremony back in 2009, bonded by shared trauma and a mutual desire to escape harsh circumstances. But after 2 years, we realized we function much better as friends than as spouses. We signed divorce papers in 2011, shared a supportive goodbye, and walked away to live our separate lives. "I'm so incredibly sorry to hear that," I breathed, a genuine ache tightening in my chest. Gabriel was a good man. "But Mr. Caldwell, I don't understand why you're calling me. Gabriel and I divorced over a decade ago. You need to contact his next of kin." "That is precisely why I am calling you," Mr. Caldwell replied, his tone shifting to a sharp, clinical precision. "You and Gabriel signed the divorce petition in 2011. However, due to a severe administrative error at the county clerk's office at the time, the final decree of dissolution was never stamped or entered into the registry. We discovered this oversight last night during an emergency audit of his estate." I sat perfectly still. The damp chill of the car was completely forgotten. "What are you saying, Mr. Caldwell?" "I am saying that the divorce was never legally finalized," he explained slowly, letting the massive weight of that reality settle through the line. "In the eyes of the law, your subsequent marriage to your current husband is completely invalid. Legally speaking, Sydney, you are still Gabriel Thorne's wife. You are his legal widow." My mind raced. If my marriage to Trent was invalid, then Trent had no legal right to anything. The house, the threats, the divorce he boasted about filing, it was all built on a marriage that simply did not exist in the eyes of the law. He couldn't take half my business, or force me into a bitter legal battle over assets, because we were never truly married. Before I could even process the magnitude of that revelation, Mr. Caldwell delivered the final, world-altering blow. "Gabriel never drafted a new will after your separation," Mr. Caldwell continued. "As his legal widow, you are the sole lawful heir to his entire estate. This includes his private liquid assets and full ownership of his venture capital firm. I need you to come to my office immediately, Sydney. You have just inherited $50 million. The phone nearly slipped from my frozen fingers. $50 million? The number echoed in the cramped, damp cabin of my battered sedan, like a transmission from another universe. I stared blankly through the foggy windshield, trying to reconcile the cold reality of my current homelessness with the astronomical figure Mr. Caldwell had just spoken aloud. Gabriel, the quiet tech genius who had once shared cheap ramen with me in a tiny studio apartment, had built an empire and left the keys entirely to me. "I need you at our offices in the Columbia Center right away, Sydney," Mr. Caldwell instructed, his voice cutting through my shock with practiced authority. "We have an immense amount of paperwork to review, and the board of directors at his venture firm is already demanding answers regarding the succession plan. I will have my security team bring you up through the private garage." I looked down at my mud-stained coat and ruined shoes. "I'm currently sitting in a motel parking lot in soaked clothes," I said, my voice trembling as the adrenaline began to fade. "And the man I thought was my husband kicked me out last night. I don't exactly look like the CEO of a $50 million estate right now." Mr. Caldwell didn't hesitate for a single second. "You are the sole owner of Thorne Capital, Sydney. You could walk into my office wearing a trash bag, and it wouldn't matter. You own the building. See you in 20 minutes. He disconnected the call. I sat in the suffocating silence of the car for a long time, my hands resting protectively over my stomach. Trent had thrown me away like garbage, confident that I had no resources, no family, and no power to fight back. He had brought his companion into my home, certain he had engineered a flawless, devastating victory. He had no idea that his cruelty had merely pushed me out the door just in time to catch a golden parachute. I started the engine, the aggressive roar of the old sedan sounding strangely triumphant as I navigated toward downtown Seattle. The Columbia Center towered into the grey morning sky. Following Caldwell's instructions, I bypassed the main lobby and drove into the secure underground garage, where a private elevator stood waiting. When the polished steel doors opened on the top floor, I stepped into a breathtaking floor-to-ceiling glass space overlooking Puget Sound. Mr. Caldwell was waiting for me. He was a distinguished gentleman in his late 60s, with sharp, intelligent eyes that took me in instantly. There was no judgment in his gaze regarding my dishevelled appearance. Instead, he gave me a respectful nod and led me into a massive boardroom. Laid out across the mahogany table were thick stacks of legal binders. Step by step, he walked me through the unbelievable reality. He produced the original 2009 marriage certificate, bearing Gabriel's unmistakable signature, followed by the 2011 divorce petition lacking the crucial judicial stamp. Because Gabriel had died intestate, meaning without a formal will updating his beneficiaries, state law automatically transferred his entire estate to his legal spouse. That was me. Your subsequent marriage to Trent is legally classified as void from the beginning, Mr. Caldwell explained, tapping his manicured finger against a thick legal text. It means it never existed in the eyes of the law. You don't need to divorce Trent because legally you were never married to him. He has zero claim to this $50 million estate. Furthermore, any marital assets you supposedly shared with him can be immediately separated under fraud statutes, as he entered that arrangement under false pretenses. A cold, sharp sense of satisfaction washed over me. Trent thought he had stripped me of my home and my dignity. He thought he held all the legal cards. In reality, he was absolutely nothing to me in the eyes of the law. However, Mr. Caldwell continued, his tone shifting to something far more intense. $50 million in liquid assets and real estate is only half the equation. The other half is Thorn Capital, Gabriel's venture firm. As the sole heir, you are now the majority shareholder and acting CEO. Last night, when I realized you were the beneficiary, I took the liberty of auditing the firm's primary debt portfolio to prepare you for immediate business operations. Mr. Caldwell slid a sleek black folder across the polished mahogany table. It came to a stop directly in front of me. I flipped open the cover. The logo on the very first page made my breath catch in my throat. It was the corporate emblem of Trent's firm, the exact company where he served as a senior executive and where Jamal worked as the chief accountant. I looked up, my heart hammering a chaotic rhythm against my ribs. What is this, Mr. Caldwell?
This is a detailed financial report on one of Thorn Capital's largest and currently most distressed debtors, he answered smoothly. Your former partner's firm secured a massive operational loan from Gabriel's company 2 years ago to fund an aggressive expansion. They have defaulted on their last 3 payments. Their business is currently burning through cash at an unsustainable rate. Mr. Caldwell leaned forward, placing his hands on the table. Yesterday afternoon, just hours before Gabriel passed away, their CEO submitted a desperate request for a $5 million loan extension. If Thorn Capital denies this extension and calls in the debt, that firm will be forced to file for bankruptcy protection by next Friday. The executive board, including your former partner, will lose everything. Their assets will be liquidated,
and their equity will be rendered completely worthless. I stared at the financial statements, the numbers blurring together as the astronomical weight of the situation finally settled over me. Trent had kicked me into the freezing rain, boasting about his corporate salary, his house, and his untouchable status. He had threatened Jamal's livelihood to force my brother-in-law into submission. He had paraded Bianca around, promising an endless life of luxury funded by his executive earnings. They all believed they held the high ground. They all believed they had won. But as I sat in that towering boardroom, looking at the exact documents that would determine whether Trent's company survived the week or collapsed into complete ruin, a slow, dangerous smile spread across my face. Trent wasn't untouchable. His entire existence, his career, his wealth, and his arrogant pride were currently balancing on the edge of a precipice, and I was the one holding absolute power over his entire future. I gazed at the clean pages of the financial report, tracing the crisp black ink that spelled out the imminent downfall of the man who had discarded me. The sheer poetry of the situation was almost too perfect to comprehend. Trent had spent years mocking my profession, calling my PR firm a cute little hobby, while he paraded around in custom suits paid for by a company quietly drowning in debt. He had built his entire identity on the illusion of corporate supremacy. Now, I was looking at the exact mathematical formula, proving he was nothing more than a desperate man dancing on a financial landmine. "Mr. Caldwell," I said, my voice steadying as the initial shock gave way to absolute, freezing clarity. "Tell me exactly how this loan is structured. If Thorn Capital denies this $5 million extension, what happens to Trent personally? I don't care about the nameless executives on his board, but I need to know the exact damage to him." Mr. Caldwell leaned back in his leather chair, a faint glimmer of professional appreciation in his eyes. He opened a secondary file and slid a highlighted contract toward me. Gabriel was a notoriously ruthless investor, Sydney. He rarely handed out unsecured cash. When Trent's firm took out this initial loan, the executive board members were required to put up their personal equity as collateral to secure the funds. Trent leveraged every single share he owns in that company to guarantee his portion of the debt. I read through the highlighted paragraph, my eyes scanning the dense legal jargon. So if they default on the payment, Thorn Capital doesn't just force them into bankruptcy, we can seize their assets. Precisely, Mr. Caldwell confirmed with a sharp nod. If you deny the extension and call the debt, the firm goes into immediate default. The corporate accounts will be frozen by the end of the business day. But more importantly, the collateral clause triggers. Trent's equity will legally transfer directly to Thorn Capital to satisfy the unpaid balance. He will be stripped of his title, his salary, and his entire net worth within hours. He will walk out of that building with nothing but a cardboard box.
A cardboard box. The image of Trent packing his own belongings into a cheap container and walking out of his glass office, just like the one he had left me with on that flooded porch, sent a rush of pure adrenaline straight through my veins. He had cast me out to make room for Bianca, relying on his executive paycheck to fund their new life together. He had threatened Jamal, holding his salary hostage to enforce his brother-in-law's silent compliance.
Trent believed that money gave him the ultimate authority to destroy others without consequence. "Where do I sign?" I asked, reaching for the silver pen resting in the centre of the mahogany table. Mr. Caldwell pushed the tall stack of legal binders toward me, flipping the first one open to a page marked with a red tab. "By signing these documents, you officially accept the inheritance of Gabriel Thorne's estate. You assume the role of a majority shareholder and acting CEO of Thorn Capital. You will gain immediate unrestricted access to the $50 million in liquid funds, as well as absolute executive authority over the firm's entire loan portfolio." I took the heavy silver pen and pressed the nib against the thick paper. My hand didn't shake. I signed my name over and over again, binding myself to the empire Gabriel had built. With every stroke of the pen, the terrified, freezing woman who had slept in a motel parking lot faded into the past. I was no longer a victim. I was the apex predator in the corporate jungle Trent thought he ruled. Once the final signatures were complete, Mr. Caldwell carefully gathered the binders. "Congratulations, Madam CEO. The estate is yours. Now, regarding the $5 million loan extension request from your husband's firm, would you like me to draft the rejection letter and initiate the asset seizure immediately? We can have them in bankruptcy court by Monday morning." I looked out the floor-to-ceiling windows at the sprawling Seattle skyline, watching the storm clouds slowly break apart over Puget Sound. If I pulled the plug right now, Trent would be ruined today. But immediate termination was far too merciful for what he had done. If we rejected the loan outright, he might panic and find a predatory lender to bail him out at the last second. He might scramble and find a way to survive. I didn't want him to survive. I wanted him to feel completely safe until the exact moment the floor collapsed beneath his feet. "No," I said softly, turning back to face my attorney. "Don't reject the extension just yet. I want to set a trap. Send a formal notice to their board stating that Thorn Capital is undergoing a sudden leadership transition due to unforeseen circumstances. Inform them that the new CEO has placed all loan extensions under indefinite administrative review." Mr. Caldwell raised an eyebrow, a knowing smile playing at the corners of his lips. "You want to keep him hanging? You want to make him sweat?" "I want to let him slowly bleed out," I corrected, my tone leaving no room for hesitation. "Let Trent believe the money is still coming. Let him keep making promises to his companion and his mother. Let him climb as high as he possibly can, so the fall completely destroys him. But while we keep his company hanging, I want to start applying pressure personally."
I pointed to the financial report still resting on the table. Trent uses company credit cards for his personal expenses. He charges expensive dinners, luxury hotel stays, and extravagant gifts to his executive expense account, claiming they are client entertainment. As the primary creditor auditing their failing business, does Thorn Capital have the right to flag and freeze discretionary corporate spending?
Mr. Caldwell tapped his chin thoughtfully. "Given their current default status and the administrative review clause you just activated, absolutely. We can freeze their corporate credit lines within an hour under the guise of an operational audit. Do it, I commanded. Freeze every single company card issued to their executive board. I want to cut off Trent's financial oxygen today. I rose from the oversized leather chair, suddenly hyper-aware of my mud-stained, ruined coat and damp hair. I possessed the power, the money, and the strategy to completely dismantle the people who had tried to bury me. But if I was going to wage this war, I couldn't look like the broken wife thrown out in the rain anymore. I needed to look like the $50 million nightmare they were about to face. I thanked Mr. Caldwell, took the unrestricted black card he handed me, and set out to reinvent myself. Stepping out of the private elevator and into the crisp Seattle air, I felt the heavy, black titanium card pressing into my palm. This wasn't just a piece of metal. It was an absolute weapon. I left the Columbia Center and headed straight toward the high-end retail district. The rain had cleared entirely, and the city streets gleamed slick and bright under the emerging sun. People cast sideways glances at my ruined, mud-caked coat and disheveled appearance, but their judgment held no power over me anymore. I was a $50 million ghost walking among them. I stepped through the towering glass doors of a flagship designer boutique. A flawlessly groomed sales associate approached immediately, her gaze darting to my filthy shoes with barely concealed disdain. She opened her mouth, likely preparing to direct me to the public restroom or politely ask me to leave. I didn't give her the chance. I handed her the titanium card. I need a complete wardrobe replacement, I said, my voice projecting absolute authority. Every single piece, from undergarments to outerwear. I want sharp lines, structured blazers, and impeccable tailoring. We are starting from scratch, and I have zero patience to wait. The associate glanced at the card, recognizing the exclusive emblem of limitless wealth. Her condescension evaporated instantly, replaced by panicked, sycophantic compliance. She ushered me into a private VIP fitting room, bringing out rows of pristine, high-end garments. I stripped away the damp, freezing clothes from the night before, letting them fall into a pathetic heap on the plush carpet. That was the old Sydney. That was the woman who begged a manipulative monster for basic human dignity. I changed into a tailored emerald suit that fit like a second skin. The sharp shoulder pads and cinched waist commanded respect. I paired it with sleek black stilettos that echoed with power with every step. I purchased cashmere coats, silk blouses, and Italian leather handbags, replacing my entire existence with items that radiated undeniable success. I also selected a heavy, diamond-encrusted watch, fastening it to my wrist as a physical reminder that my time as a victim was officially over. When the associate handed me the receipt, the astronomical total didn't even make me blink. I told her to throw my old clothes directly into the dumpster out back. Next, I walked into the most exclusive salon in the downtown corridor. I demanded an immediate appointment, the titanium card effortlessly bypassing their 6-week waiting list. A team of stylists went to work. They washed away the freezing rain, the mud, and the exhaustion of the last 24 hours. They treated my hair, turning the tangled mess into a sleek, high-gloss blowout that framed my face with sharp precision. The makeup artist erased the dark circles of my sleepless night, replacing my tired, tear-stained complexion with a flawless, striking look. Red lips, sharp contours, and eyes that held absolutely no mercy. When I finally looked into the full-length mirror, my breath caught. I didn't just look wealthy, I looked lethal. The gentle, accommodating wife, who had tirelessly funded Trent's climb up the corporate ladder, was entirely gone. The woman looking back at me was an untouchable executive, a mother fiercely protecting her child, and a billionaire CEO ready to bring accountability down upon her enemies. I thanked the stylists, leaving a massive tip that made them gasp, and walked back out into the bustling city. I needed a base of operations, a fortress that Trent could never touch. I directed the private driver I had hired to a 5-star luxury hotel, known for its ironclad security and absolute discretion. At the front desk, I booked their premier penthouse suite, indefinitely. I gave explicit instructions to the concierge that my presence must remain strictly confidential, and no visitors were to be permitted without my direct verbal authorization. The manager personally escorted me to the private elevator. When the doors opened to the penthouse, I was greeted by a sweeping panoramic view of the Seattle skyline and the vast ocean beyond. The suite was a masterpiece of modern architecture, featuring a massive marble kitchen, a sunken living area with a contemporary fireplace, and a master bedroom that felt like an absolute sanctuary. I walked over to the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking down at the tiny cars navigating the streets below. I placed my hand gently over my stomach, feeling a deep sense of peace wash over me. "We are safe now," I whispered to my baby. "No one is ever going to throw us out into the cold again. I promise you, we have everything we need, and anyone who tried to harm us will face the ultimate consequences." I sank into the plush velvet sofa, finally allowing my body to rest in the quiet, secure warmth of the suite. I had just purchased a brand new encrypted smartphone to replace the one Trent had shattered on the concrete steps. I set up my new accounts, ensuring my digital footprint was absolutely secure and completely unlinked from any plan I had previously shared with my former husband. Right as I was syncing my professional business contacts, the pristine screen suddenly illuminated. A loud notification chime cut through the silent room, shattering the perfect stillness of my new fortress. It was an encrypted, anonymous text message from an unregistered number. I stared at the screen, my heart taking on a sudden cautious rhythm. Only my attorney had this new number. I opened the secure application. The message contained only 2 sentences. "I know exactly what Trent is planning to do next. Meet me at the coffee shop in Pike Place in 1 hour. Come alone." I stared at the glowing screen, calculating the risks. This could easily be a trap orchestrated by Trent or Patricia, an attempt to corner me into signing away my rights to the house. But the old Sydney, the one who would shrink in fear and second-guess her every move, was entirely gone. I locked the phone, grabbed my Italian leather handbag, and headed straight for the private elevator. I stepped out into the bustling Seattle streets, blending seamlessly into the affluent morning crowd. The coffee shop at Pike Place was tucked away in a secluded dim corner, far from the main tourist traffic. It was the perfect location for a clandestine meeting. I pushed open the heavy wooden door, the brass bell chiming softly above, as my eyes scanned the row of dark booths against the back wall. Sitting in the furthest, most obscured corner, his hands tightly gripping a paper coffee cup, was Jamal. He was wearing a heavy, dark jacket, the collar pulled up slightly to shield his face from anyone walking by. He looked absolutely exhausted, carrying the physical toll of a man whose conscience had kept him awake all night. I walked toward his booth, my black stilettos clicking sharply against the polished concrete floor, commanding the space with every step. When I slid into the leather seat opposite him, he looked up, his eyes widening in absolute shock. He took in my sharp, emerald designer suit, my flawless blowout, and the diamond watch gleaming in the dim cafe lighting. This was definitely not the soaked, shivering victim he had tried to hand a coat to the night before. "Sydney," Jamal breathed, his voice filled with a mixture of disbelief and immense relief. "You look incredible. I was so worried about you. I thought you were out on the streets in the cold. I've had a knot in my stomach the entire night." I offered a tight, highly controlled smile. "I found a much better arrangement, Jamal. You don't need to worry about me anymore. But why am I here? What do you know?" He looked down at his coffee cup, his broad shoulders slumping with a deep sense of shame. "First, I need to apologize. I'm so incredibly sorry about last night. I should have stood up to Courtney. I should have done something right then and driven you to a hotel myself. I watched them pop champagne and toast to that fake heiress while you were out in the storm. It was the most sickening display of cruelty I've ever seen in my life." I raised my hand, cutting off his apology before he could spiral further into guilt. "You don't owe me an apology, Jamal. I know exactly what Trent had over you. He threatened your job and your livelihood. You have a family to protect, and Courtney would have made your life a living hell. I'm not angry with you. I'm angry with them." Jamal shook his head firmly, his expression hardening with a newfound resolve. "No, it's not just about the job anymore. I am done being a pawn in their toxic games. Courtney and Patricia are absolute vultures, and Trent is a monster. I spent the entire night thinking about how easily he threw you away after everything you did for him, after you funded his entire lifestyle. I realized that if he could do that to his loyal wife,
He won't hesitate to throw me under the bus when his company inevitably collapses. I want out of that family, Sydney, and I want to help you take him down.
He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small silver flash drive. He placed it carefully on the table, sliding it across the smooth wood until it rested directly in front of me. "Take it," he urged, his voice dropping to an urgent, cautious whisper. "What is this?" I asked, picking up the small metal device. It felt heavy with implication. "Those are the internal corporate ledgers for Trent's firm," Jamal explained, leaning forward to prevent anyone else from hearing. "I am the chief accountant. I have unrestricted access to everything. Trent's business is a complete house of cards, Sydney. He has been falsifying the books for over a year, hiding massive operational losses by shifting funds between illicit shell accounts. The company is utterly insolvent. He is desperately waiting for that $5 million loan extension from the venture firm to cover up the entire fraud. If they perform a strict audit on him, he's going to federal prison." A wave of pure vindictive satisfaction rushed through me. Jamal had absolutely no idea that I was the CEO of the very venture capital firm holding that loan. He had just handed me the exact forensic evidence I needed to bypass a lengthy corporate audit and proceed to an immediate reckoning. I could freeze his accounts today and hand this flash drive over to the federal authorities tomorrow, watching Trent be escorted out of his glass office in handcuffs. It was the ultimate silver bullet. "Jamal, this is incredible," I said, carefully sliding the flash drive into my designer handbag. "You are risking everything by giving me this evidence. When the fallout happens, I will make sure you are fully protected. You have my absolute word on that." I gathered my things, ready to return to my penthouse suite and call Mr. Caldwell to initiate the final fatal blow to Trent's company. But just as I began to slide out of the booth, Jamal reached across and caught my wrist. His grip was tight, desperate, and urgent. His eyes were wide, filled with an unsettling mixture of sympathy and rage.
"Wait, Sydney, don't leave yet. You need to know the rest of it."
I paused, sinking back into the leather seat. I looked at the terror in his expression, suddenly realizing that corporate fraud was merely the tip of the iceberg. "What else, Jamal? What else did you find in those files?" Jamal took a shaky breath, locking his eyes directly onto mine. "The corporate fraud is bad," he said, his voice trembling under the weight of the secret. "But that isn't the worst part. I hacked into his personal files last night, looking for offshore accounts. Trent lied to you about the clinic. He lied to you during the argument on the porch. He lied about everything." He stared at my stomach, a look of profound sorrow crossing his face. "Trent never had a vasectomy." The words hung in the air between us, heavy and suffocating. I stared at Jamal, processing the absolute magnitude of the betrayal. Trent never had the procedure. The accusation on the porch, the shattered pregnancy test, the absolute disgust in his eyes. It was all a carefully orchestrated performance. "He fabricated the medical records," Jamal explained, his voice shaking with revulsion. "I found a thread of emails in his deleted folders. He paid off a corrupt staff member at a private clinic to forge a post-op report. He knew that child was his, Sydney. He knew you never stepped out on him." My hands clenched into fists beneath the table. "Why?" I demanded, the fire in my chest burning hotter than it ever had before. Why construct such an elaborate sociopathic lie just to kick me out? If he wanted a divorce, he could have just asked for one. "Because of Bianca," Jamal said, leaning even closer. "She told Trent that she is pregnant too, and she has him convinced that she is the sole heiress to a massive international mining conglomerate. Trent is drowning in corporate debt, and he saw Bianca as his ultimate golden ticket. But she demanded a ring and a house before she would introduce him to her billionaire father." The pieces of the puzzle slammed together with sickening clarity. Trent needed me out of the house immediately. If he simply filed for a standard divorce, it would take months, and our assets would be frozen and divided. He needed a dramatic, fault-based excuse to throw me to the curb and play the devastated victim. By accusing me of infidelity and claiming the child wasn't his, he instantly secured the sympathy of his toxic mother and sister, justifying his swift, cruel eviction of me. He threw away his loyal wife and his own unborn child, all to chase a fortune that didn't exist. The sheer greed of it was unfathomable. Jamal checked his watch, his eyes darting toward the entrance of the cafe. I have to get back to the office before Trent notices I'm gone from my desk. If he suspects I'm talking to you, he'll terminate me before I can secure my family's finances. You've given me everything I need, Jamal, I said, my voice eerily calm. I promise you, Trent won't even have a company left to fire you from. You are safe. Jamal stood up, pulling his dark collar high once more. He took a step away from the booth, but stopped suddenly, turning back to face me with a sharp, determined look in his eye. There is one more thing you need to know, Jamal said. Trent is making his big move tonight. He booked the main private dining enclave at Luminary, that new Michelin-starred restaurant downtown. He is hosting a massive, lavish family dinner. Patricia, Courtney, and all of Trent's high society circle will be there. He is charging the entire event to his corporate credit card. He plans to officially introduce Bianca to everyone and announce their engagement. A cold, beautiful sensation coursed straight down my spine. Luminary was famous for its absolute exclusivity, catering only to the ultra-wealthy. Trent was pulling out all the stops, using money he didn't actually have, to impress a woman he believed would save him from financial ruin. What time is the reservation? I asked. 8 o'clock tonight, Jamal replied. He wants to make a massive statement. Thank you, Jamal, I said, a slow, predatory smile forming on my lips. It will definitely be a massive statement. Jamal gave me a quick nod and hurried out of the coffee shop, disappearing into the crowded Seattle streets. I sat alone in the booth for a few minutes, my fingers tapping a rhythmic cadence against the smooth wood of the table. Trent thought he had successfully buried me. He believed he was untouchable, surrounded by his toxic enablers, celebrating his new life with stolen corporate funds. He was about to learn a very painful lesson about underestimating a woman who had lost everything but held $50 million. I picked up my designer handbag and stepped out into the crisp afternoon air. I had a few hours to prepare, and I knew exactly what I was going to wear to my husband's engagement party. I returned to my penthouse suite and laid out my armor for the evening. Bypassing the emerald suit from the morning, I selected a sharply tailored black silk tuxedo jacket with rigid shoulder pads and a plunging neckline, paired with custom trousers that elongated my silhouette. I fastened a heavy, vintage diamond choker around my neck and stepped into a pair of red-bottomed stilettos. The woman looking back in the mirror was completely unrecognizable from the soaked, discarded wife of yesterday. She was the embodiment of pure, unadulterated power. At exactly 8 o'clock, my private driver pulled up to the valet stand outside Luminary. The restaurant was a fortress of modern culinary prestige in downtown Seattle, boasting a months-long waiting list and a reputation for serving strictly the ultra-wealthy. I bypassed the crowded lobby and approached the maitre d'. Before he could politely inform me that they were fully committed for the evening, I slid that heavy, titanium black card across the welcome desk. I demanded a premier table with an unobstructed view of the main private dining enclave. The maitre d' took one look at the emblem of exclusive authority on the card, bowed deeply, and personally escorted me into the softly lit, opulent dining room. I was comfortably seated in a velvet booth, ordering a glass of their most expensive vintage champagne. It didn't take long to lock onto my target. Trent had claimed a massive round table right in the center of the elevated dining enclave. He was talking loudly, ordering expensive appetizers, and bragging to the sommelier about his supposedly sophisticated palate, carrying the unearned confidence of a man spending someone else's money. Sitting right beside him was Bianca, dressed in a loud, heavily sequined gown, playing the part of the bored, wealthy heiress to perfection. She laughed artificially at every word Trent said, tossing her hair and flashing a massive, though clearly synthetic, diamond ring. Patricia and Courtney sat on either side of them, practically vibrating with a sickening sort of joy. Patricia was waving her hands, speaking at a volume entirely inappropriate for a Michelin-starred establishment, ensuring the surrounding tables knew her son was marrying into an international mining fortune. Courtney was nodding eagerly, snapping photos on her phone to document their new social status. They treated the waitstaff terribly, snapping their fingers and demanding immediate service. They looked like a pack of ravenous hyenas feasting on a carcass, completely oblivious to the fact that the meat had already been thoroughly poisoned. I sat quietly, taking a slow sip of my champagne, letting the exquisite taste wash over me. I watched them indulge in stolen corporate funds, absorbing their toxic happiness. It took barely 15 minutes for the illusion to shatter. Courtney raised her phone to take a selfie with Bianca. As she panned the lens across the room, her camera passed directly over my booth. She lowered the phone slowly, her eyes narrowing in the dim ambient light. The smug smile vanished from her face instantly. She frantically tapped Patricia's shoulder, pointing her manicured finger directly in my direction. Patricia turned her head, her jaw visibly dropping. The sheer shock of seeing me sitting in the city's most exclusive restaurant, dripping in diamonds and high-end silk, clearly short-circuited her brain. But instead of feeling intimidated or cautious, Patricia and Courtney did exactly what narcissistic bullies always do. They doubled down on their cruelty. Pushing back their chairs, they strode out of the dining enclave, their heels clicking aggressively against the polished hardwood floor. They marched right up to my table, deliberately blocking my view of the rest of the restaurant, looming over me like sinister gargoyles. "What on earth do you think you're doing here?" Patricia hissed, keeping her voice low but laced with absolute venom. "How did you even get past the front doors?" I placed my champagne glass on the table, folding my hands elegantly in my lap. "I'm having dinner, Patricia. This is a restaurant. That's typically how it works." Courtney slapped both hands flat against the edge of my table, leaning in so close I could smell the cheap wine on her breath. "Are you seriously stalking us right now, Sydney? This is a pathetic new low, even for you. Trent kicked you out last night. You're homeless. You have no job, no money, and no family. Did you max out your last pathetic credit card just to buy a knockoff suit and follow us here?" I looked at her with an expression of pure, unbothered amusement. "You seem incredibly escalated, Courtney. You might want to lower your voice before security asks you to leave. Luminary has a very strict policy regarding public tantrums." Patricia scoffed, her face turning an ugly shade of red. "How dare you speak to my daughter that way? We know why you're here. You're desperate. You intercepted Trent's emails or tracked his location just to come here and beg him to take you back. You're trying to ruin his engagement dinner because you're a jealous, childless failure who couldn't keep her man." I simply smiled. The old Sydney would have cried. The old Sydney would have absorbed those vicious words and let them tear her apart. But the billionaire CEO sitting in this booth now felt only a cold, clinical pity for the two fools standing before her. "I am not here for Trent," I said smoothly, picking up my glass once more. "I am simply enjoying a beautiful evening, though watching the two of you worship a woman you know absolutely nothing about is highly entertaining." Courtney let out a sharp, mocking laugh. "We know what Bianca is worth, which is more than you could ever comprehend in 10 lifetimes. You're just a bitter orphan who got kicked back into the gutter where you belong. Stand up and leave this restaurant right now, or I swear I will scream and tell the manager you are harassing us." Before I could even respond to Courtney's childish threat, heavy footsteps approached rapidly from behind them. Trent had noticed his mother and sister missing from the engagement table and had followed them down. He strode up to my booth, his face twisting into a mask of pure fury as he recognized me. He was wearing a custom suit, no doubt charged to the very corporate account I had ordered Mr. Caldwell to freeze just hours ago. Trent looked at my expensive clothing, my calm demeanor, and the crystal glass of champagne resting on the table. A flash of panicked anger crossed his eyes. He genuinely believed I was a desperate, penniless woman trying to create a public scene, to ruin his big night and scare off his fake heiress. Reaching into his suit jacket, his jaw clenched so tightly that a muscle twitched in his cheek, he pulled out a brand new, crisp $500 bill. He leaned over the table, invading my personal space, his eyes burning with a mixture of hatred and arrogant superiority.
He slammed the cash down onto my table with a loud, aggressive smack.
The crisp $500 bill sat aggressively against the pristine white tablecloth, a pathetic green flag of his overwhelming arrogance. Trent leaned down, his hands bracing firmly against the edge of the velvet booth. He was attempting to intimidate me with his physical size, hovering over my dining space like a schoolyard bully. "Take the money, Sydney," he growled. He kept his voice low, a harsh, gravelly whisper, so the surrounding patrons of the Michelin-starred establishment wouldn't hear his utter lack of class. Take the cash and leave this restaurant right now, before you scare Bianca. You've proved your pathetic point by following us here. Now go buy yourself a cheap hotel room for the night and stop embarrassing yourself in front of my family. Patricia and Courtney stood right behind him, their faces glowing with a vicious, unearned satisfaction. They looked at the $500 bill as if Trent had just performed a supreme act of benevolent charity. Courtney even crossed her arms, letting out a soft, mocking sigh. "Yeah, you should get on your knees and thank him," Courtney chimed in, her voice dripping with thick condescension. "That's entirely too much money for an unemployed foster orphan who tried to trap my brother with another man's child. Move along, Sydney. Take the handout and go." I looked down at the money. I didn't reach for it. I didn't flinch, and my expression didn't change at all. I simply stared at the crumpled green paper as if someone had just placed a dead cockroach on my dining table. The absolute audacity of a man drowning in millions of dollars of corporate debt trying to buy my dignity with $500 was a poem of pure irony. I raised my eyes slowly, locking my gaze directly onto Trent. He was expecting tears. He was expecting me to snatch the money out of sheer desperation. Instead, he met a wall of freezing, terrifying indifference. I didn't say a single word to him. I simply lifted my right hand and snapped my fingers sharply twice in the air, summoning the floor manager. The reaction was instantaneous. The general manager of Luminary, a man who had likely spent decades catering to the most discerning members of the Seattle elite, recognized the subtle, commanding gesture of someone who expected immediate compliance. He practically sprinted across the dining room floor. He ignored Trent, Patricia, and Courtney entirely, as if they were nothing more than inconvenient furniture blocking his path to importance. "Yes, madam," the manager said, bowing deeply and deferentially the moment he reached the edge of my booth. "How may I assist you this evening?" I reached into my Italian silk clutch and slowly pulled out the heavy, matte black titanium card. The metallic surface caught the dim ambient lighting of the restaurant, flashing the exclusive, invite-only insignia of Thorn Capital. I placed it deliberately onto the white tablecloth, right next to Trent's pathetic $500 bill. The manager's eyes locked onto the black card immediately. For a fraction of a second, the colour drained from his face, replaced instantly by an expression of absolute, unwavering reverence. This was a card issued only to the top tier of global wealth, a corporate instrument that literally possessed no spending limit. "I find the atmosphere in this corner to be incredibly cheap and visually offensive," I said. My voice was smooth, clear, and perfectly enunciated, every word precisely cutting through Trent's fragile ego. "I need something to cleanse my palate and my eyes. Do you currently have the 1990 Chateau Petrus in your private cellar?" The manager swallowed hard, his posture straightening even further as he handled the sheer weight of the request. "We do, madam. We have exactly 3 bottles remaining in our private reserve. They are currently priced at $5,000 a bottle." "Excellent," I replied without a second of hesitation. "I will take 2 of them." Trent let out a sharp gasp. Courtney's jaw literally dropped, her eyes nearly bulging out of her skull. $10,000 worth of wine. They stared at me as if I had suddenly grown a second head. Their brains short-circuited completely, entirely unable to process the math unfolding in front of them. "But I won't be drinking them myself," I continued smoothly. I waved a casual hand toward a neighbouring booth, where a young, overwhelmed-looking couple was celebrating what appeared to be a quiet anniversary. "Please open both bottles and send them over to that lovely couple of strangers over there with my compliments. Tell them it's a gift to celebrate genuine affection, something this restaurant seems to be severely lacking tonight. And while you're doing that, please dispose of this garbage someone left on my table." I used the tip of my manicured nail to casually flick Trent's $500 bill right off the edge of the table. The note fluttered pathetically through the air, landing directly into a puddle of melted ice water near the base of Trent's polished leather shoes. "Right away, madam. Absolutely, madam," the manager said, his voice vibrating with awe. He gathered the black card with both hands, treating it like a holy relic. bowed once more and hurried off to execute my incredibly lavish order. I leaned back into the plush velvet booth, elegantly crossing my legs and picking up my crystal glass of champagne. I took a slow, deliberate sip, my eyes never leaving Trent's face.
The silence that swallowed my former husband and his toxic family was deafening.
Patricia looked like she was about to hyperventilate. Her chest heaved dramatically, her eyes darting frantically between the spot where the black card had been, me, and the young couple at the next table who were about to receive a $10,000 gift from a stranger. Courtney gripped the edge of my table so hard her knuckles were bone white. The smug superiority had been violently slapped out of her. Trent was completely paralyzed. The arrogant sneer had been ripped from his face, replaced by a deep, primitive confusion. His mouth was open, but no sound came out. He looked down at his soaked $500 bill lying on the floor, then back up at my vintage diamond choker, my custom silk tuxedo jacket, and the absolute power radiating from my posture. He was a man who worshipped money, who measured every ounce of human worth by a price tag. And I had just effortlessly burned $10,000 in front of him, simply to insult him.
"You," Trent stammered, his voice cracking into a high-pitched, pathetic screech. Where did you get—" He couldn't even finish the sentence. His reality was collapsing in real time. He had spent the last 24 hours convincing himself that I was a broken, penniless victim freezing on the streets. Seeing me wield the kind of astronomical wealth he could only dream of completely shattered his psychological defenses.
"I suggest you run along back to your fake heiress, Trent," I said softly, my tone laced with a lethal amount of amusement. "You hovering around my table like a common beggar is ruining my appetite." Patricia grabbed Trent's arm, her manicured nails digging desperately into his suit jacket. She was terrified. She didn't know who I had become, or who was funding me, but the sheer financial violence of my actions told her that I was no longer the prey. "Trent, we need to go back to our seats," Patricia hissed, her voice trembling with rising panic. "Bianca is watching us." Trent flinched instinctively, stumbling back a step as if I had burned him. His eyes were wide, filled with a deep-seated fear. His fragile ego, which relied entirely on financial superiority, had just been pulverized into dust. He couldn't comprehend my wealth, but his desperate need to save face in front of his new companion overrode his shock. He grabbed his mother and sister by their arms, yanking them away from my booth. He threw his shoulders back, puffing out his chest in a pathetic, transparent attempt to reclaim his shattered dignity, and stormed back toward the private dining enclave to pay his own massive bill and prove he was still a king. I sat in the quiet sanctuary of my velvet booth, watching Trent stride back into his elevated dining area. He practically shoved his mother and sister into their respective chairs before dropping heavily into the seat next to Bianca. From my vantage point, the entire scene played out like a silent movie about a sinking ship. He immediately flacked down a passing waiter, waving his hand with that exaggerated, impatient authority he always used when he wanted to impress a room. He was calling for the check. He needed to prove to his fake heiress, to his toxic family, and most importantly to himself, that he was still the wealthy executive in control. The waiter stepped forward, holding a sleek black leather folder containing the invoice for their extravagant engagement dinner. Given the massive seafood towers, imported steaks, and numerous bottles of wine they had consumed over the last 2 hours, the total was undoubtedly thousands of dollars. Trent didn't even look at the itemized receipt. He wanted to showcase his supposed infinite wealth. With a theatrical flourish, he reached into his tailored suit jacket and pulled out a heavy, metallic corporate credit card. I recognized that specific card instantly. It was the executive expense account tied directly to his firm, the exact corporate credit line I had ordered Mr. Caldwell to freeze an hour ago. Trent dropped the metal card onto the silver tray with a loud metallic clink. He leaned back in his chair, draping an arm casually around Bianca's shoulder, projecting the image of a man who didn't care about the price of anything. Bianca smiled and kissed his cheek, her eyes gleaming at the display of financial dominance. Patricia and Courtney finally stopped looking over their shoulders at my table, choosing instead to bathe in the glow of Trent's corporate power. I picked up my champagne glass and waited. Less than 3 minutes later, the floor manager returned, the very same manager who had just handled my $10,000 wine order. He approached Trent's table, but he didn't carry the usual discreet, quiet deference reserved for wealthy patrons. Instead, his posture was stiff, filled with a cold, rigid professionalism. He held the silver tray containing Trent's corporate card and a small printed receipt. "I apologize, sir," the manager said. His voice carried clearly across the quiet, ambient hum of the restaurant. "Your card has been declined." The manufactured smile slid off Trent's face instantly. Bianca stopped laughing, her manicured hand freezing on the stem of her wine glass. Patricia and Courtney exchanged a sharp, confused glance. "Oh, a decline?" Trent scoffed, his voice laced with aggressive disbelief. "That's a platinum corporate account. There is no limit on that card. Clearly your machine made an error. Run it again." "I have already processed it a second time to ensure absolute accuracy, sir," the manager replied smoothly, not backing down an inch. "The terminal is functioning perfectly. The transaction was refused by your issuing bank. The error code explicitly states that the account has been frozen." Trent's face flushed a deep, ugly shade of dark crimson. The surrounding tables had gone completely silent. Patrons who had been enjoying their meals were now openly staring at the drama unfolding in the center of the room. Nothing attracts the attention of the elite quite like a sudden public failure of wealth. "Run my personal card. Just run it," Trent snapped, snatching the corporate card from the tray and slamming down another piece of plastic. He was sweating now. I could see the visible beads of moisture forming on his forehead. I knew exactly what was coming next. Trent had drained our joint checking account the night before to pay the deposit on whatever apartment he planned to lease with Bianca. His personal credit cards were already maxed out from funding his secret double life. He had nothing left. He was banking entirely on the corporate expense account to fund this lavish lifestyle until his next bonus cleared. A bonus that was never going to arrive. The manager took the personal card and walked back to the terminal. He returned less than a minute later, shaking his head. "I apologize, sir, but this card has also been declined for insufficient funds. Do you have another form of payment for this $4,200 balance?" The words insufficient funds echoed through the dining enclave like a gunshot. Bianca physically recoiled, shifting her chair backward to distance herself from the humiliation. The illusion of her powerful, wealthy fiancé was evaporating right before her eyes. Trent was hyperventilating. He frantically patted his pockets, pulling out his wallet to search for a hidden lifeline that simply did not exist. The manager stood waiting, his posture entirely unforgiving.
"Oh, Mom," Trent hissed, leaning across the table toward Patricia. His voice was sharp and panicked, stripped entirely of the arrogant swagger he possessed 10 minutes ago. "Mom, I need you to put this down. My bank must have flagged my accounts for a fraud alert because of the large purchases today. Just cover the bill, and I'll wire you the cash tomorrow morning."
Patricia looked absolutely mortified. She was a woman who valued social standing above all else, and her son was now begging her for money in front of a Michelin-starred waitstaff and a room full of wealthy strangers. Furthermore, Patricia didn't exactly have $4,000 in disposable cash just sitting in a checking account. She lived comfortably, but her wealth was tied up in assets and a strict monthly budget set by her late husband's trust. "I don't have that kind of limit on my daily card, Trent," Patricia whispered furiously, her face turning an alarming shade of purple. "Use your other account." "I don't have another one," Trent shot back, his panic escalating into genuine terror. "Courtney, give them whatever cards you have on you. Give them your card. We have to split it. Hurry." Courtney let out a dramatic gasp of outrage, but she reluctantly began digging through her designer bag. For the next 5 painful minutes, I watched as my former husband, his toxic mother, and his vicious sister frantically emptied their wallets. They handed the manager a pathetic stack of 4 different credit cards, begging him to split the massive bill across multiple accounts just to cover the cost of their engagement dinner. Bianca looked absolutely disgusted. The fake heiress who demanded diamond rings and luxury mansions was now watching her supposed corporate kingpiece to gather his mother's grocery money just to pay for a plate of appetizers. She crossed her arms, glaring at Trent with absolute revulsion. I raised my crystal glass toward their table, offering a silent, mocking toast. Trent happened to look up at that exact moment. Our eyes locked. He saw the cold, calculated victory gleaming in my gaze. Suddenly, a sharp, piercing ringtone erupted from inside Trent's suit jacket. He pulled out his phone, his hand trembling violently as he looked at the screen. It was an automated alert from his firm's financial department. I watched as his eyes widened in pure, absolute terror as he read the notification. This wasn't a banking glitch. This wasn't a routine fraud alert. The message undoubtedly informed him that the primary creditor, holding his entire firm together, had just frozen all executive assets, pending a comprehensive audit. The company money was gone. The firm was in a real-time freefall. Trent shoved the phone back into his pocket, his breathing coming in ragged, desperate gasps. He didn't say a single word to Bianca. He didn't apologize to his mother or thank her for bailing him out. He simply threw his chair back, slamming it against the floor, abandoning his family at the table as he blindly sprinted toward the restaurant exit, desperately scrolling through his contacts to call his boss. The complete destruction of his life had officially begun. Trent burst through the heavy glass doors of Luminary, stumbling onto the damp Seattle sidewalk. The cool night wind hit his flushed face, but did nothing to lower his soaring body temperature. He scrolled frantically through his contacts, his thumb slipping on the glass screen due to the cold sweat coating his palms. He had abandoned his mother and sister entirely, leaving them inside to deal with the humiliated fake heiress. He had only one desperate focus now. He needed to know why the financial lifeline of his entire corporate existence had just been violently severed. He pressed the dial button for the company president, pacing erratically along the sidewalk. The phone rang 6 times before transferring to voicemail. He cursed loudly, kicking a nearby metal pole, entirely ignoring the startled looks of passing pedestrians. He tried again, then a 3rd time. Finally, a breathless, panicked voice answered the line. The company president didn't offer pleasantries. He simply shouted that Thorn Capital had initiated an emergency freeze on all operational funds, claiming their loan extension was under a hostile administrative review. The company was hemorrhaging cash in real time, and every single corporate credit line had been shut down without a single warning. Trent spent the rest of the night pacing the floors of his empty dark house, the very house he had violently forced me out of just 24 hours prior. He didn't sleep a single wink. His phone buzzed relentlessly, but it never brought the news he wanted. Bianca had sent a single text message stating she was staying at a boutique hotel downtown and not to bother her until he had resolved his embarrassing financial crisis. The woman he had destroyed his marriage for was already pulling away at the first sign of financial distress. By the time the sun rose over Puget Sound, Trent looked like a hollow, decayed shell of the arrogant executive he claimed to be. He threw on the same wrinkled suit from yesterday, masking the scent of stale fear with expensive cologne, and rushed into his corporate offices. The atmosphere in the building was pure, unadulterated chaos. Junior employees whispered in the break rooms. Board members shouted behind closed glass doors. Jamal had locked himself in the accounting department, refusing to respond to Trent's frantic demands for updated spreadsheets. The entire firm was collectively staring down the barrel of an immediate bankruptcy. Trent locked himself in his corner office, staring at the flashing red alerts across his dual monitors. His personal bank accounts were completely drained. His corporate safety net was gone. His only hope for survival rested in the hands of the unseen executives at Thorn Capital. For the next 8 hours, Trent launched a brutal, desperate telephone campaign. He dialed Thorn Capital's primary contact number over and over again, only to be met with automated hold music and polite, uncompromising receptionists who funneled him into endless voicemails. The aggressive tone of corporate authority he had started the morning with slowly degenerated into a pathetic, high-pitched plea. He needed to speak to a loan officer. He needed to speak to a portfolio manager. He needed anyone to explain why a guaranteed $5 million loan extension had transformed into an immediate asset freeze. At exactly 4 o'clock in the afternoon, the automated hold music cut out abruptly. A crisp, highly professional female voice came over the line. "Executive officers of Thorn Capital. How may I direct your call?" Trent gripped the edge of his mahogany desk, his knuckles stark white. He leaned into the speakerphone, his voice trembling with exhaustion and pure terror. "This is Trent, executive board member for your primary tech portfolio business. I've been trying to reach someone in your lending department all day. Our operational accounts have been frozen without due process. We submitted a direct request for a $5 million loan extension to Gabriel Thorne yesterday. I demand to speak to him immediately to clear up this catastrophic paperwork error." A brief, chilling pause followed on the other end of the line. The soft clicking of a keyboard echoed faintly. "I apologize for the confusion, sir," the secretary replied, her tone perfectly stripped of any human empathy. "Mr. Gabriel Thorne passed away yesterday afternoon." Trent stopped breathing. The blood completely drained from his face. The man who held the debt portfolio of his entire company was dead. For a fleeting second, a sick, distorted sense of relief washed over Trent. If the billionaire was dead, the debt collection might be delayed in probate court. They might have months to restructure their finances while attorneys fought over the estate. However, the secretary continued smoothly, precisely cutting through Trent's brief delusion. Now the transition of leadership has been fully executed. A new CEO has assumed absolute control of the firm and the entire $50 million estate, and it was by the direct personal order of the new CEO that your specific corporate accounts were flagged for immediate asset seizure due to default. Your loan extension has been formally denied. Trent vaulted out of his leather chair, the panic that had been choking him all day, finally boiling over into absolute rage. "What do you mean, denied?" he screamed, slamming his fist onto the desk. "You can't just bankrupt a company overnight because of a new boss. We had a long-standing arrangement with that firm. Who exactly is this new CEO? I demand to know who has the authority to destroy my entire life. Put them on the phone right now." The secretary didn't raise her voice. She didn't flinch at his hostility. Instead, she delivered the final blow with absolute clinical precision. "The CEO does not take calls from defaulting debtors, sir," she stated coldly. "But since you demanded official verification of our leadership, I am forwarding a verified corporate press release to your professional email address right now. It outlines the succession plan and introduces the sole heir to the Thorne legacy. Have a pleasant evening." The line went dead. Trent froze in the center of his office, his chest heaving as he stared at his computer monitor. A new email popped into his inbox. The subject line read, "Official Thorne Capital Leadership Transition." His hand shook violently as he reached for the mouse and clicked it open. A high-resolution, professionally shot photograph filled the screen. It was a picture of me. I was wearing a tailored black silk tuxedo blazer, a vintage diamond choker, and looking directly into the camera with an expression of absolute, undeniable authority. Beneath the photo, bold black text officially introduced Sydney Thorne as the sole legal widow, the exclusive heir to the $50 million fortune, and the current CEO of the very company that now held the absolute power to dismantle Trent's entire financial life. As Trent stared at my face, his mind completely shattered. The woman he had abandoned in the freezing rain, the woman he had discarded to chase a fake fortune, was the very billionaire standing next to his heavily leveraged life with a match. His fingers went entirely numb. His expensive smartphone slipped from his hand, crashing loudly onto the hardwood floor. He collapsed back into his chair, gasping for air that suddenly felt completely toxic. He was entirely irreversibly ruined. Trent sat frozen on his office floor for nearly an hour, the sheer scale of his miscalculation knocking the wind right out of his lungs. But as the paralyzing shock finally began to fade, the primal instincts of a desperate, greedy man took over. He crawled across the hardwood floor, using his shaking, sweaty hands to scoop up the dropped phone. He refused to accept complete financial ruin. His toxic ego quickly convinced him that Sydney, the accommodating woman who had faithfully supported his career for 5 years, was still hidden beneath this formidable new billionaire persona. He told himself her wealth was an opportunity, not her downfall. He just needed to find her. He just needed to spin the perfect manipulative story to bring her back under his control. Over the next several hours, he frantically pulled favors, bribed valets, and questioned downtown concierge, burning through every single social connection he he had left in the city. Deep into the night, his desperate efforts paid off. A highly compensated concierge at the financial district's most exclusive luxury hotel confirmed that a woman matching my exact description, utilizing an unlimited corporate account, had booked their penthouse suite indefinitely. Trent didn't hesitate for a single second. He drove his rented sports car recklessly through the city, abandoning it carelessly at the curb before rushing into the grand marble lobby. I was standing near the massive stone fireplace of the penthouse suite, looking out over the glittering Seattle skyline, when the security intercom buzzed. The front desk manager sounded incredibly tense as he informed me that a frantic man claiming to be my husband was demanding immediate access to my suite. A slow, chilling smile spread across my face. I could have ordered security to throw him out onto the pavement. I could have let him suffer in the lobby, but denying him entry was simply too easy. I wanted him to walk into my fortress. I wanted him to see the astronomical wealth he had personally thrown away. "Let him up," I commanded quietly. Less than 2 minutes later, the private elevator doors glided open with a soft chime. Trent practically stumbled into the luxurious foyer. He looked completely pathetic. His expensive suit was deeply wrinkled, his tie was gone, and deep, exhausted dark circles framed his bloodshot eyes. He took in the staggering luxury of the sprawling penthouse, the imported modern art, the floor-to-ceiling glass walls, and the quiet, undeniable power. I radiated just standing there in custom silk loungewear. The weight of his mistake hit him so hard that his knees physically buckled. Trent dropped straight to his knees onto the polished hardwood floor. He crawled forward on all fours, completely abandoning any remaining shred of his corporate dignity. "Sydney, oh my God, I've been worried sick," Trent cried out. Genuine tears ran down his flushed cheeks, though I knew with absolute certainty he was weeping for his bank account, not his marriage. "Please, you have to listen to me. I made a catastrophic mistake. I wasn't in my right mind yesterday." I didn't move an inch. I simply looked down at him, my expression a mask of pure, unbothered ice. "Explain it to me, Trent. Explain how throwing my belongings into the freezing mud was just a simple mistake." He crawled even closer, stopping just short of the edge of my silk slippers. "It was Bianca," he sobbed, his voice cracking with desperate, manufactured agony. "That woman is an absolute psychopath, Sydney. She targeted me at a networking event because she knew I was completely overwhelmed by the corporate audit. She exploited my vulnerability and fed me absolute lies. She manipulated my mind until I didn't even know who I was anymore. I kicked her out today. I swear to you, the second I realized what she had done to us, I threw her out of my office. The sheer audacity of his gaslighting was breathtaking. He was throwing the very woman he had proudly brought into my home straight under the bus just to save his own skin. He reached up, clasping his hands tightly together like a man praying to a deity. "And the baby," Trent continued, his words pouring out in a frantic, hyperactive rush. "Sydney, I was so confused and angry because of the pressure Bianca put on me, but I called my former urologist in a total panic this morning. I had them pull my medical file from 3 years ago. The doctor told me that the procedure must have naturally reversed itself. He said it happens in incredibly rare cases. My vasectomy failed, Sydney. This child is a medical miracle, and it is absolutely mine. I know it's my baby." I stared at him, marveling at the sheer depth of his depravity. Jamal had already given me irrefutable proof that Trent had bribed a corrupt clinic clerk to falsify the post-op reports. Trent had never even had the procedure in the first place. Yet here he was, kneeling on my floor, weaponizing our unborn child and fabricating an incredibly elaborate, absurd lie about a medical miracle, all just to secure a $50 million payday. "I know I hurt you," Trent wept, finally reaching out to gently touch the toe of my silk slipper. "But I am begging for your forgiveness. I love you. I have always loved you. We are a family, Sydney. We are a family, and we need to be together for our child." He looked up at me, his eyes wide with a desperate, hopeful plea. He genuinely believed his performance was working. He thought mentioning family would trigger the submissive, compliant wife who used to solve all his problems. I looked down at the men sobbing on my floor. I didn't scream. I didn't throw a glass against the wall. Instead, I let a soft, cold smile touch the corners of my mouth. "I appreciate your honesty, Trent," I said, my voice smooth and perfectly measured. Ending a marriage is a massive decision, especially when a child is involved. I think it's incredibly important that we handle this transition with the proper respect our family deserves. Trent let out a long, shuddering sigh of relief. A spark of greedy triumph ignited in his tearful eyes. He thought he had successfully manipulated the situation. He thought my calm demeanor meant submission. However, I continued, stepping back slightly to break his physical contact with my shoe. "We can't sort out something this complex in a hotel room. We need to do this properly. I want you to bring Patricia and Courtney to Mr. Caldwell's law firm this Friday at noon sharp. We will sit down as a family, discuss our assets, and determine the future of our estate together." Trent scrambled to his feet, his face glowing with pure, unvarnished victory. "Yes, absolutely. Friday at noon. My mother and sister will be so relieved. Sydney, they've been incredibly worried about you too. We will all be there. Thank you. Thank you for giving us another chance." He nodded repeatedly as he backed away toward the elevator, completely blind to the metaphorical axe swinging toward his neck. He stepped into the elevator, convinced he had just secured a $25 million victory. He had absolutely no idea he had just accepted an invitation to his own execution. The next morning, the sleek digital console in my penthouse suite chirped with an alert from the front desk. The concierge informed me that a massive delivery required my immediate authorization. I cleared it completely, assuming a courier was dropping off the final legal documents from Mr. Caldwell regarding the venture capital firm. Instead, when the private elevator doors slid open, 3 hotel staff members emerged, struggling to carry the most ostentatious, nauseating floral arrangement I had ever seen in my life. Towering white orchids, imported lilies, and cascading rare roses completely filled my foyer. The overwhelming, sickly sweet scent of the flowers instantly choked the crisp air of the suite. It radiated absolute desperation. Pinned to the largest, most expensive arrangement was a heavy, cream-coloured envelope sealed with gold wax. The elegant cursive handwriting belonged unmistakably to Patricia. I tore it open, my eyes scanning the saccharine. Completely fabricated words of apology inside. "Sydney, my dearest daughter," she wrote. "Trent told us everything about that horrible, heartbreaking misunderstanding at the restaurant the other night. I am utterly sick to my stomach that my protective maternal instincts came across as hostile. We were simply drowning under the immense stress of Trent's corporate audit, and we unfairly took it out on you. Please forgive an old woman who loves you dearly. You have always been the heart of this family. I cannot wait to embrace you on Friday, so we can turn this ugly page together." I stared at the heavy cardstock, feeling a wave of literal physical disgust. Less than 48 hours ago, this woman had stared into my eyes on a flooded porch, calling me a stray dog with no lineage. Now, facing the blinding, undeniable glare of a $50 million fortune, she was suddenly playing the role of a doting, affectionate mother-in-law. I tossed the card onto the marble kitchen island and instructed the hotel staff to take every single arrangement directly down to the basement trash compactor. I refused to let the stench of her hypocrisy linger in my sanctuary for even a single second. Moments later, my secure phone buzzed on the counter. I picked it up to see a notification from a social media platform I rarely checked. It was from Courtney, the very sister-in-law who had threatened to call security at the Michelin-starred restaurant if I didn't leave, was now publicly broadcasting her undying loyalty to me. She had posted a highly filtered, heavily edited old photo from a holiday party over 3 years ago. In the image, we were standing next to a decorated fireplace. I remembered that night vividly, because just minutes before the flash went off, Courtney had been loudly mocking my outfit. Now the caption beneath the photo made my blood run cold. "Reunited, and it feels so good," Courtney had written, followed by a string of heart emojis. I am incredibly blessed to have a sister-in-law who embodies grace, forgiveness, and unconditional love. Family is forever, Sydney. You are the best sister a girl could ever ask for. The comment section was already exploding with mutual acquaintances praising our beautiful bond. Courtney was carefully constructing a public narrative, laying a digital paper trail to prove a deep, loving relationship. She was desperately trying to erase the reality of her extreme cruelty, replacing it with a fabricated history of sisterhood. It was a masterclass in narcissistic manipulation, designed entirely to frame them as a perfect,
supportive family in case their sudden reconciliation was ever challenged in court.
But I didn't need to guess what they were plotting behind closed doors. Jamal, my steadfast ally, trapped inside their toxic inner circle, was keeping me completely informed. Late that afternoon, my encrypted phone lit up with an incoming call. Jamal spoke in a low, urgent whisper, clearly hiding in a remote stairwell to avoid being overheard. "Sydney, you need to be fully prepared for Friday," Jamal warned, his deep voice tight with anxiety and disgust. "I was at the house last night, right after Trent got back from your hotel. They aren't genuinely sorry at all. They don't care about you, and they certainly don't care about the baby. They spent the entire night celebrating over expensive scotch." "Celebrating what?" I asked, leaning against the glass wall of the penthouse, looking down at the city below. "Celebrating their upcoming payday," Jamal explained, his tone dripping with pure contempt. "Patricia and Courtney convinced Trent that your newfound wealth is their ultimate golden ticket. The moment Trent got home, they frantically researched legal details online. They believe that because you inherited this massive $50 million legacy while legally married to Trent, it is automatically classified as marital property under state asset laws. Trent was practically jumping up and down in the living room, claiming he is legally entitled to a full $25 million. A dark, humorless chuckle escaped my lips. The sheer arrogance of their greed was stunning. They genuinely believed they could abuse me, discard me, and then stroll into a law firm to take half of a corporate empire they had absolutely nothing to do with. "It gets worse, Sydney," Jamal continued, his tone turning grim. "Patricia liquidated an emergency retirement account this morning. She used the cash to hire a notoriously aggressive divorce and asset division lawyer. This guy is a total shark, specializing in ruthless corporate marital dissolutions. They paid him a massive retainer to walk into your lawyer's office on Friday and completely take over. Trent's entire plan is to sit there playing the loving,
forgiving husband while his attack dog lawyer legally forces you to hand over the $25 million.
Jamal took a deep breath before delivering his final warning. "If you refuse to hand over the money, they plan to threaten you with a highly publicized, prolonged legal battle that will freeze your assets for years. They think you'll just hand over the cash to make them go away. They think they have you completely trapped." I looked down at the bustling streets of Seattle, feeling the heavy, cold power of the truth I held in my hands. They were swaggering toward Friday's meeting, absolutely certain they would walk out as multimillionaires. They had no idea they were walking straight into a legal slaughterhouse. "Thank you, Jamal," I said, my voice dropping to a smooth, lethal whisper. "Let them bring their shark. By the time Friday is over, he's going to need a lot more than a law degree to save them from the storm that's coming." Friday arrived with a crisp, brilliant blue sky that felt like a stark contrast to the upcoming destruction. I sat at the head of the massive mahogany table in Mr. Caldwell's ultra-modern conference room at the Columbia Center. I was dressed in a tailored charcoal grey suit that projected pure, unyielding authority. My posture was perfectly straight, and my expression was a mask of absolute impenetrable calm. Mr. Caldwell sat to my right, his pristine leather briefcase resting closed on the table. We didn't need to review our strategy. The legal trap was set, the weapon was loaded, and all we had to do was wait for the targets to step into the crosshairs. Right at noon, the heavy glass doors swung open. Trent swaggered into the room first, radiating a nauseating, unearned aura of confidence. He had clearly spent hours grooming himself for this exact moment, wearing his most expensive navy suit and sporting a carefully practiced expression of deep marital concern. Right behind him walked Patricia and Courtney, both clutching designer handbags with identical, predatory smirks that they desperately tried to mask as supportive smiles. Patricia wore a lavish string of pearls, clearly dressing for the new tax bracket she believed she was about to enter.
Following the family was a sharp-featured man in his late 50s carrying a bulging briefcase. This was undoubtedly the aggressive attack dog attorney Patricia had emptied her retirement account to hire. Let's call him Mr. Pierce.
Trent immediately walked to my side of the table. Ignoring the empty leather chair directly across from me, he pulled a chair right up next to mine. He reached out, attempting to cover my hand with his, completely ignoring the fact that just days prior he had thrown my belongings into the freezing mud and brought his pregnant mistress into my home. "Sydney, darling," Trent murmured, his voice dripping with artificial warmth. "You look absolutely beautiful today. My mother, my sister, and I have been so worried about you. We're just glad we can finally sit down as a family and sort everything out. We want to support you through this massive transition." I calmly withdrew my hand, sliding it off the table and resting it elegantly in my lap. The physical rejection caused a brief, ugly flash of anger to cross his eyes, but he quickly masked it with a muttered sigh. He sat back, crossing his legs like a king preparing to collect his taxes. He truly believed his performance was flawless. He thought I was still the vulnerable, compliant wife who would desperately cling to his fake affection to avoid a confrontation. Mr. Pierce didn't bother with pleasantries. He marched to the table and slammed a heavy, labelled manila folder down onto the polished mahogany surface. The loud smack echoed through the quiet conference room. A deliberate intimidation tactic meant to rattle me. "Let's skip the formalities and get straight to the point," Mr. Pierce stated, his voice booming with arrogant authority. "My client, your husband, has shown immense patience and grace regarding your recent erratic behavior. However, we are fully aware of the $50 million inheritance you recently received. Under the state asset laws governing this jurisdiction, any assets acquired within the timeline of a legal marriage are classified as marital property." Patricia shifted in her seat, lifting her chin proudly, while Courtney smirked openly, pulling out her phone as if ready to start shopping for yachts the second the meeting concluded. They could barely contain their pure, unadulterated greed. Mr. Pierce tapped the folder aggressively with his index finger. "We have prepared a comprehensive settlement agreement. Trent is willing to be incredibly generous. He is demanding exactly 50% of the total inheritance, $25 million, transferred to his personal account within 14 business days. In exchange, he will agree to a peaceful, uncontested divorce, and he will magnanimously allow you to keep your small public relations business." I stared at the attorney, my face entirely blank. "And if I refuse this generous offer?" I asked, my tone completely devoid of emotion.
Mr. Pierce leaned across the table, baring his teeth in a predatory grin. "If you refuse, we will immediately file for a highly publicized contested divorce. We will petition the court to freeze the entirety of the $50 million inheritance until a judge rules on the asset split. That is a brutal process that will take years. Furthermore, my client is fully prepared to take his story to the media. We will paint you as an emotionally unstable, manipulative gold digger who abandoned her devoted husband the second she came into money. Your professional reputation will be utterly destroyed. Sign the paperwork today, Sydney, or we will drag you into a legal nightmare you simply cannot afford to fight." A heavy, suffocating silence descended upon the room. Trent sat up straighter, a look of supreme, undeniable triumph plastered across his handsome face. He genuinely believed he had me cornered. He thought the threat of a messy public scandal and frozen assets would force me to sign away half of Gabriel's empire just to make him go away. Patricia let out a soft, victorious sigh, practically tasting the millions she believed were about to flood her bank account. Courtney crossed her arms, looking at me with pure, unmasked disdain, waiting for me to break down and surrender. I didn't flinch. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't say a single word in defense against their absurd, fabricated threats. Instead, I slowly reached for the crystal water glass resting in front of me. I took a deliberate, measured sip of the ice water, letting the cool liquid soothe my throat, while they all watched me with eager, greedy anticipation. I set the glass down with a soft, definitive clink. Turning my head,
I locked eyes with Mr. Caldwell and gave him a single, barely perceptible nod. It was time to drop the bomb. Mr. Caldwell calmly unclasped the brass buckles of his pristine leather briefcase. The crisp, metallic clicks echoed like a judge's gavel in the tense silence of the conference room. He didn't rush. He extracted a single thin folder with precise movements, entirely free of the aggressive theatrics Mr. Pierce had employed. He placed the folder squarely in the centre of the table, resting his hands gently on top of it. "Mr. Pierce," Mr. Caldwell began, his voice maintaining the measured, unbothered tone of a man holding all the winning cards. "Your settlement proposal is certainly ambitious. It relies heavily on the statutes of this jurisdiction regarding marital property. However, there is a fundamental flaw in your legal strategy. In order for assets to be classified as marital property and therefore subject to division, there must first exist a legally recognized marriage." Trent frowned, a flicker of confusion breaking through his arrogant facade. "What are you talking about? Sydney and I have been married for 5 years. We have a marriage certificate." Mr. Pierce puffed out his chest, stepping forward to defend his client's claim. "If you're attempting to stall by questioning the validity of the marriage license, I assure you it is fully registered with the county. We aren't playing word games here today, Caldwell." "We certainly are not playing games," Mr. Caldwell replied smoothly, sliding the thin folder across the table until it came to a stop directly in front of Trent's aggressive attorney. "I suggest you review the documents inside that folder, Mr. Pierce, specifically the certified records obtained directly from the state clerk's office regarding my client's previous marriage back in 2009. Patricia scoffed loudly, waving her hand dismissively. Sydney was a teenager back then. That ridiculous little marriage was dissolved ages ago. Trent told us all about it. "An application for dissolution was filed," Mr. Caldwell corrected, his eyes locking dead onto Mr. Pierce, who was rapidly losing colour as his eyes scanned the first page. But due to a critical administrative error, the final decree was never officially stamped or entered into the legal registry. The divorce was never legally finalized. Trent stared at his lawyer, the smug certainty melting from his face, replaced by a cold dread that began to creep up his spine. "Pierce, what is he talking about? What does that mean?" Mr. Pierce didn't answer right away. He flipped to the second page, his hands beginning to tremble slightly. The aggressive shark suddenly realized he had marched his client directly into a legal minefield. "It means," Mr. Caldwell stated, delivering the final blow with clinical precision, that when Sydney entered into a marriage contract with you 5 years ago, she was still legally the wife of Gabriel Thorne. Under the laws of this state, your marriage to my client is classified as an unintentional act of bigamy. The legal term is void ab initio." Mr. Caldwell leaned forward, his voice dropping into a hard, unforgiving register. "It means void from the very beginning. You are not her legal husband, Trent. You never have been. Therefore, there is no marital property to divide. There is no divorce to contest. In the eyes of the law, you are a complete stranger to my client, and you are entitled to absolutely nothing." Following Mr. Caldwell's declaration, an absolute silence descended upon the room. The kind of deep, heavy silence where I could hear the faint ticking of my diamond watch. Trent stared at the senior attorney, his mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. He turned his desperate, frantic gaze to Mr. Pierce, waiting for his high-priced attack dog to shred the argument to pieces. But Mr. Pierce didn't attack. The aggressive lawyer remained completely silent, his eyes scanning the certified documents bearing the official raised seals of the state. He flipped through the pages, reading the statutes, cross-referencing the dates, and confirming the total absence of a final judicial signature on my 2011 divorce decree.
"Do something," Trent hissed, slamming his hand onto the mahogany table. "Pierce, you told me our case was ironclad. Tell him he's lying."
Mr. Pierce slowly closed the manila folder. He didn't look at Trent. He looked directly at Mr. Caldwell with a grim expression of professional surrender. The look of a man who knew he had just been completely outmaneuvered. "He isn't lying," Mr. Pierce said, his voice stripped of all its previous arrogance. "State law is absolute on this matter. Void ab initio means the marriage legally never existed. You have no marital property rights. You have absolutely no legal standing to demand a single dollar of her inheritance." A sharp, strangled gasp escaped Patricia's throat. All the colour drained from her face instantly, leaving her looking like a withered grey ghost. She clutched her pearl necklace, her chest heaving as the reality of her shattered payday set in. Courtney gripped the edge of the table, her manicured nails scratching against the polished wood. She began taking short, rapid breaths, hyperventilating as the millions she had already spent in her mind vanished into thin air. Mr. Pierce stood up. He didn't ask for permission. He simply reached for his briefcase, snapping the brass buckles shut and stuffing his useless settlement papers inside. "Where do you think you're going?" Trent demanded, his voice cracking with pure panic. "You work for me. Fix this." "I work for clients who actually have a legal case," Mr. Pierce replied coldly, clicking his briefcase shut with a sharp snap. "And more importantly, I work for clients who can afford my hourly rate. Since you have no legal right to $25 million and your personal bank accounts are currently empty, my services are officially terminated. Have a nice afternoon." The lawyer turned on his heel and marched right out of the conference room, abandoning his client without looking back. The heavy glass door swung shut, sealing Trent, Patricia, and Courtney inside their own personal nightmare. Trent collapsed back into his chair, his hands shaking violently. He looked at me, his eyes wide with a pathetic, desperate plea. "Sydney, please," he begged, his voice broken. "You can't do this. We built a life together. I bought that house with you. We're starting a family. You can't just erase 5 years of our lives over a legal technicality." I leaned forward, resting my forearms on the table. I'm not erasing anything, Trent. I'm simply holding you to your own standards. You looked me in the eye on a freezing, flooded porch, handed me a trash bag of ruined clothes, and told me I was nothing. You discarded a stranger into a storm just to move your fake heiress into my home. You just forgot to check if that stranger had the power to destroy you. Patricia tried to speak, her voice trembling uncontrollably. "Sydney, we can find a compromise. We are reasonable people." I ignored her entirely, keeping my eyes locked dead on Trent. "The discussion regarding my personal life is over," I stated, my tone shifting from icy rejection to sharp corporate authority. "Now, let's get down to business."
I nodded to Mr. Caldwell once more. For the second time, he opened his briefcase and extracted a sleek black folder embossed with the silver logo of Thorn Capital. He slid it across the table until it rested directly in front of Trent.
As the primary shareholder and acting chief executive officer of Thorn Capital, I began, each word dripping with lethal precision. "I have completed an administrative review of your company's financial status. I have reviewed the fraudulent accounting ledgers, the hidden operating losses, and that desperate $5 million loan extension request." Trent's eyes darted down to the folder. He recognized his own corporate financial statements. The last remaining drop of colour drained from his face. "As your primary creditor, I'm officially denying your request for a loan extension. Furthermore, due to the severe material breach of contract and the fraudulent financial reporting submitted to my firm, I am calling in your existing debt. The entire balance must be settled immediately by the close of business today." "You can't do that," Trent screamed, lunging out of his chair. "If you demand repayment today, the company defaults. My shares are the collateral. You will liquidate my entire net worth. I'll lose my job. I'll lose everything I worked for." "Yes," I replied calmly. "Your shares are forfeited. They will be legally transferred to Thorn Capital within the hour. You're no longer an executive. You have no salary, no corporate credit cards, and absolutely zero equity. You're broke." Trent froze entirely, his brain finally comprehending the absolute, inescapable nature of his total destruction. He had no marriage to leverage for cash. He had no house, because having his name on the deed meant nothing without the funds to pay the mortgage. He had no job to run back to. He was completely stripped of his assets, standing in clothes paid for with money he no longer possessed. He was utterly and completely ruined. Patricia began to weep openly, burying her face in her hands. Courtney clutched her chest, gasping for air as a full-blown panic attack took hold of her. They had walked into this high-rise office, expecting to conquer an empire. Instead, they had been stripped bare. Trent staggered backward, defeated, broken, and entirely drained of his former arrogance. He turned toward the heavy glass doors, desperate to escape the room, to run away from the catastrophic wreckage of his own making. But as his hand reached for the handle, I spoke one last time, my voice cutting through the heavy, suffocating air of the conference room. "Don't leave just yet, Trent," I commanded softly, a razor-sharp smile curving my lips. "We aren't finished. There is one more guest." The heavy glass doors of the conference room pushed open, and every eye in the room turned toward the entrance. Jamal stepped across the threshold. He was wearing a sharp, impeccably tailored suit, standing perfectly straight and projecting an aura of absolute, unshakable confidence. He no longer looked like the trapped, humiliated accountant who had looked down in shame on my flooded porch. He looked like a man who had finally broken his chains and reclaimed his complete identity. Courtney gasped, her hands flying over her mouth in pure indignant fury. "Jamal, what on earth are you doing here?" she demanded, her voice screeching with arrogant confusion. "You're supposed to be at the office fixing the financial mess." Trent glared at his brother-in-law, a flash of his old toxic authority trying to resurface despite his recent financial downfall. "Jamal, get back to work immediately. I did not authorize you to leave the building, let alone attend my private legal meetings." Jamal didn't flinch. He didn't drop his gaze. He simply walked past his frantic wife and his ruined boss, stepping right up to the mahogany table. Reaching into his leather briefcase, he extracted a thick, labeled manila folder and dropped it onto the polished wood surface, right next to the corporate financial documents Mr. Caldwell had produced.
The heavy thud echoed like the final nail being driven into a coffin.
"I don't take orders from you anymore, Trent," Jamal stated, his deep voice resounding with absolute authority. "My resignation was submitted to HR an hour ago. But before I cleared out my desk, I decided to do a little independent auditing, not just on the fraudulent corporate accounts you tried to force me to hide, but on the new woman you so proudly moved into Sydney's home." Patricia took a trembling breath, clutching her chest as a fresh wave of panic washed over her. "What are you talking about?" she whispered, her eyes darting nervously toward the folder. "Bianca is an international mining heiress. She comes from a very prominent, wealthy family." Jamal let out a short, humorless laugh. He flipped open the cover of the dossier, revealing a massive stack of background checks, credit reports, and court filings. "There is no international mining conglomerate." Jamal's words cut through the room with lethal precision. "Her real name is Bianca Rossi. She has no trust fund. She has no billionaire father. What she does have is over $150,000 in maxed-out credit card debt, 2 repossessed vehicles, and 3 pending civil judgments against her for severe financial fraud across 4 different states." Trent stumbled forward, gripping the edge of the table as if the floor beneath him had suddenly vanished. "No," he stammered, his eyes scanning the highlighted legal documents frantically. "No, that's absolutely impossible. She showed me her portfolio. She showed me the investment accounts. She showed you forged documents she bought online, Trent," Jamal corrected ruthlessly. "She is a serial con artist who targets arrogant men in expensive suits. She saw you flashing an unlimited corporate credit card at that networking event and realized you were the perfect gullible mark. She needed a wealthy idiot to absorb her massive debts and fund her lifestyle, and you handed her the keys to Sydney's house on a silver platter." Courtney let out a sharp, hysterical sob. She clutched her perfectly styled hair, shaking her head violently. "This can't be true. We already told everyone at the country club about her family. We introduced her to the board. We bragged to everyone about her lineage."
"It gets worse," Jamal continued, refusing to offer them even an ounce of mercy. "Trent, you threw your incredibly loyal wife out into the freezing rain because you claimed Bianca was pregnant with your child. You bragged to everyone about securing your legacy."
Trent swallowed hard, a sickly pallor washing over his face. He looked at Jamal with raw, unadulterated terror. "She is pregnant," Trent whispered desperately, his voice breaking. "I saw the ultrasound. I went to the clinic with her. That child is mine." Jamal pulled a final document from the back of the folder, a printed set of text messages, emails, and eviction notices. recovered by a private investigator. Bianca is currently facing a massive eviction lawsuit at her downtown apartment complex, Jamal explained, dropping the paperwork directly in front of Trent. She hasn't paid rent in over 8 months. To avoid being thrown onto the street, she has been sleeping with her 52-year-old landlord since last summer. The room fell dead silent as the horrific realization washed over Trent, his eyes widening like saucers as he stared at the text logs. "That child doesn't belong to you, Trent," Jamal stated, delivering the absolute coup de grace. The timeline aligns perfectly with her landlord. She was knocked up by a middle-aged man she was using for free rent. When she realized he didn't actually have the money to support a child, she panicked. She went out looking for a wealthy savior to pin the pregnancy on, and you walked right into her trap. You weren't her knight in shining armor. You were just her latest wallet. And now that your corporate credit cards are declined, she's already packing her bags. Trent collapsed physically. His knees gave out entirely, and he sank heavily back into the leather chair, staring blankly at the wall. The astronomical weight of his catastrophic failure finally crushed him, his mind violently tearing itself apart. Patricia buried her face in her hands, weeping loudly as she mourned the total destruction of her social standing and the fictional wealth she had staked her entire future upon. Courtney stood frozen, staring at her husband in absolute horror, realizing that Jamal held all the cards and was no longer playing their toxic family games. I watched Trent's chest heave as he struggled to breathe, looking down at his trembling, empty hands. The devastating contrast hit him like a freight train. He had once held a genuine $50 million empire in the palm of his hand. He had been married to a woman who loved him unconditionally, funded his career, and carried his actual biological child. Instead of cherishing that beautiful life, his blind greed and toxic arrogance had driven him to burn it all to ash. He had thrown away a fiercely loyal billionaire wife and his own flesh and blood, all to completely destroy his career, face federal fraud charges, and lose his home, all for a bankrupt scammer carrying a stranger's baby.
He had traded a flawless diamond for a handful of toxic mud, and now he was finally choking on it.
The silence of the conference room shattered as the sheer reality of their total ruin finally settled in. Patricia was the first to snap. The woman who valued elite social standing above all else suddenly lunged across the mahogany table. Her hand connected with Trent's cheek in a resounding, echoing slap that cracked across the quiet room, jolting his head to the side. "You absolute, utter fool!" Patricia screamed, her voice completely stripped of its usual aristocratic restraint. "You threw away $50 million for a penniless fraud. You bankrupted your company. You humiliated our family in front of the entire city, and you dragged me into this mess. Were you going to lose everything because you couldn't control your massive, pathetic ego?" Trent just sat there, clutching his stinging cheek and staring blankly at the floor, letting his mother continue to scream at him. He was completely hollowed out, a broken shell of the arrogant man who had swaggered into the room just an hour before. Meanwhile, Courtney turned her frantic, venomous rage toward the only target she felt she could still control. She marched directly up to Jamal, her face contorted into a mask of pure, ugly privilege. "How dare you do this to us?" Courtney shrieked, poking her finger aggressively into her husband's chest. "You were supposed to protect this family. You were supposed to fix his books, not hand the evidence over to her. You get back to that office right now, shred those files, and figure out a way to save my brother's company. If you don't fix this today, Jamal, I swear to God, I will make your life a living nightmare." Jamal didn't flinch. He looked down at the woman he had spent a decade trying to please, his expression completely blank, holding nothing but deep, absolute exhaustion. Reaching into the inner pocket of his tailored suit jacket, he pulled out a thick white envelope and pressed it firmly against Courtney's chest, forcing her to catch it. "I'm never fixing anything for your brother ever again," Jamal stated, his deep voice echoing with a profound sense of relief. "Those are signed divorce papers, Courtney. My attorney filed them with the county court this morning. I'm officially resigning from the company, effective immediately. You can keep the house, the cars, and the country club membership. What's left of them before the federal creditors seize them anyway. Have a nice life." Courtney looked down at the legal envelope in her trembling hands. The venomous rage drained from her face, instantly replaced by pure, suffocating panic. She looked up at Jamal, her mouth opening to argue, but he simply turned his back on her, calmly walking over to my side of the table to stand with the winning team. I slowly stood up, smoothing the sharp lines of my black silk tuxedo blazer. The sudden movement drew every eye in the room. Trent finally lifted his gaze from the floor, his eyes bloodshot and wide, with a pathetic, desperate plea. He opened his mouth, likely to beg for even a shred of mercy, but I raised my hand, silencing him instantly. "Not a single word, Trent," I commanded, my voice dropping to a smooth, lethal register that froze the air in the room. "I want you to remember the freezing rain from Tuesday night. I want you to remember the exact sound my bags made when you threw them into the mud. You looked me in the eye and told me I was a stray dog. You told me I had no family, no lineage, and absolutely nothing to my name." I leaned forward, resting my hands on the polished table, ensuring he felt the full, overwhelming weight of my presence. "You thought you were burying me. You thought you could strip away my dignity and leave me to freeze in the cold while you celebrated your brilliant little scam. But throwing my bags into that storm was the single greatest favor you have ever done for me. You didn't break me, Trent. You simply handed me the keys to my cage. And while you were busy playing wealthy executive for a bankrupt, desperate fraud, I stepped into an empire." I picked up my black titanium card resting on the table, sliding it carefully into my designer handbag. "You are bankrupt," I delivered the final conclusion, looking down at the miserable, broken man who used to be my husband. "You are facing federal fraud charges, and you are completely alone. You dug your own grave, Trent. Now you can lie in it." I turned on my heel, my red-bottomed stilettos clicking sharply against the hardwood floor. Mr. Caldwell and Jamal followed closely behind me like a highly compensated, fiercely loyal vanguard. I marched straight out of the heavy glass doors of the conference room, leaving Trent, Patricia, and Courtney to scream at each other amid the total catastrophic ruin of their own greed. 6 months later, the Seattle rainy season gave way to a brilliant, sun-drenched afternoon. I sat on a plush outdoor sofa in the sprawling, manicured gardens of my $50 million estate. A gentle breeze from the Puget Sound carrying the scent of blooming hydrangeas. I looked down at the beautiful, perfectly healthy baby boy resting securely in my arms. He had Gabriel's dark hair and my stubborn jawline, a living testament to survival and new beginnings. The heavy glass patio doors slid open, and Jamal walked out onto the terrace. He was wearing a sharp, custom navy suit and looked completely rejuvenated. As the newly appointed Chief Financial Officer of Thorn Capital, he had spent the last 6 months aggressively restructuring the firm's loan portfolios. He handed me a crisp financial report, a warm, genuine smile lighting up his face. "Everything is finalized, Sydney," Jamal reported proudly. "The final corporate liquidation of Trent's old firm went through this morning."
I took the report, gently bouncing my son on my lap. "And Trent?" I asked, my tone entirely conversational.
Jamal let out a short, satisfied laugh. He pled guilty to the corporate fraud charges to avoid maximum sentencing. He's currently working a grueling minimum-wage construction job, digging ditches on the highway just to pay off his court-ordered restitution. Patricia and Courtney are crammed into a tiny one-bedroom apartment in the suburbs, constantly screaming at each other over money. I looked out over the sparkling ocean, feeling a deep, unshakable sense of peace wash over my entire soul. They were completely irrelevant now, nothing more than a distant, ugly memory fading into the background of my incredibly bright future. I pressed a soft kiss to my son's forehead. Some betrayals feel like the absolute end of the world, those moments that convince you everything you built has been completely destroyed. But sometimes the universe strips away the toxic weight holding you down, simply to force you to step into your true power. I learned that you never have to destroy the people who tried to break you. You simply have to step aside and let their own greed consume them. Because at the end of the day, the absolute sweetest revenge isn't anger or retaliation. It is living a beautiful, fearless life, flying so incredibly high that they lose the right to even look up at you. The most profound lesson from Sydney's journey is that the ultimate revenge is, quite simply, a life well lived. When faced with devastating betrayal from those we trust, Our first instinct is often to strike back. However, this story demonstrates that true power lies in walking away and building your own empire. Toxic people will inevitably self-destruct through their own endless greed and lies. You rarely have to lift a finger to ruin them. By focusing entirely on your own healing, setting firm boundaries, and pursuing success, you reclaim your power and render those who mistreated you completely irrelevant. Have you ever chosen to walk away and heal rather than seek revenge? Share your story in the comments section below.